Chapter 972. The Supreme Sword Technique, Thousand God Tribulation, could be said to be Yi Guqin's true trump card. It was also the only technique apart from the 9 Tribulations Heart Sutra that Yi Guqin had obtained from the Sword of Thunder Tribulation. And the 4th style that was manifested was called Heaven's End. Heaven and earth will be destroyed, all life will fall, Buddha will cry, Heaven's End. Yi Guqin was secretly shocked after roughly skimming through the words that recorded Heaven's End. In order to display Heaven's End, Yi Guqin had to cultivate to the divine dwelling stage at the very least. And even if he was at the divine dwelling stage, he could only barely display a few % of the power of Heaven's End. But Yi Guqin was not discouraged. Given his current cultivation speed, the divine dwelling stage was not far away. Finally, it's over. The dark clouds on the entire 20th floor dispersed, replaced by a bright universe. Yi Guqin stood alone in the void, sighing with emotion. The 20th floor of Mount St. Crossing only simulated a trace of the heavenly tribulation. It couldn't be compared to the real heavenly tribulation. Yi Guqin finally understood why there were so many false saint experts. And saints of the heavenly tribulation were extremely rare. The heavenly tribulation was indeed not something that could be easily passed. The heavenly tribulation simulated in Mount St. Crossing does have the power of a real heavenly tribulation, but it's still far from it. But this is also an extremely rare experience, and will be of great help to you when you pass through a real heavenly tribulation in the future. Su Qingyu smiled. As a saint expert who had passed through a heavenly tribulation, Su Qingyu naturally had the most right to speak. Well, I'm really looking forward to it. There was no fear in Yi Guqin's eyes, only anticipation. And just when Yi Guqin thought he was about to be sent out, golden splendor suddenly rippled out from the void in the sky. Among the golden splendor, there seemed to be countless mosquito-like ancient golden characters that recorded the truth of heaven and earth and the rules of the great Tao. What is this? Yi Guqin's eyes widened in surprise. Those ancient golden characters fell from the sky and directly fused into Yi Guqin's body. Yi Guqin did not feel uncomfortable at all. Instead, he felt extremely comfortable. For a moment, his 5 senses sharpened and his mind became clear, as if a dusty mirror had been wiped clean. This is... Even Su Qingyu's eyes were filled with surprise. For a saint like him to reveal such an expression, it was clear that he was surprised. Senior Su, what is this? Yi Guqin was puzzled. Yi Guqin, you've really gained a lot this time. Su Qingyu sighed. Senior, please speak clearly, Yi Guqin said. This is the law of the holy path. Su Qingyu said. Saint Tao laws? Yi Guqin's eyes flashed. He had occasionally heard of Saint Tao laws, but he was not very clear about them. The reason why saints are saints is because they can control the power of laws, Su Qingyu said. Is this a power that only saints can control? Yi Guqin was shocked. He did not expect that passing the 20th level of Mount St. Crossing would give him such a reward. Compared to comprehending the lightning sword intent, this Saint Tao law enlightenment was a great fortuitous encounter that made one's eyes turn red with envy. Although the divine path precepts cannot directly increase your combat strength, they will play a vital role in your future heavenly tribulation. The power of the precepts is too useful for heavenly tribulation, Su Qingyu said solemnly. Now that Yi Guqin had received the Saint Tao laws, it meant that he could feel the power of laws in advance. This would be of great help to Yi Guqin in his future heavenly tribulation and even in comprehending his own power of laws. The Saint Tao laws were too precious. Yi Guqin exhaled deeply with a faint smile on his face. The opportunity on Mount St. Crossing is too great. No wonder you can pass the 20th level. You can be called a natural saint. Yi Guqin finally understood the meaning of being a natural saint. To be able to pass through the 20th level, one must be a stunning genius. Furthermore, with the Saint Tao law enlightenment, Yi Futian could not help but wonder. With the addition of the Saint Tao laws, there was a great possibility that one could become a saint. But you have to be careful. The Saint Tao laws are an absolutely fatal temptation to false saints, Su Qingyu said in a serious tone. Yi Guqin's expression turned serious when he heard this. The reason why false saints could not pass heavenly tribulation was that they were stuck at the level of comprehending laws. Yi Guqin had received the Saint Dao laws, so he was naturally in high demand for false saints. It was conceivable that if some false saints with bad natures knew that Yi Guqin had the Saint Dao laws, they would definitely put aside their dignity to deal with Yi Guqin. Although the Saint Dao laws have been integrated into your body, it is inevitable that others will be jealous. Perhaps there will be crazy people who want to extract the laws from your body, Su Qingyu warned. It seems that the Saint Dao laws are a great opportunity, but also a big trouble, Yi Guqin said with a faint smile. I can help you conceal the fluctuations of the laws, but you still have to be careful, Su Qingyu said. With a wave of his hand, the power of the primordial spirit spread out. Although Su Qingyu's primordial spirit had not recovered, it could still conceal the fluctuations of the Saint Dao laws. Then, the strange fluctuations of the laws in Yi Guqin's body were completely restrained. Thank you, Senior. Yi Guqin cupped his hands slightly. As Yi Guqin obtained the Saint Dao laws, his challenge was completely over. Outside Mount Saint Crossing, everyone was still nervously watching. The entire Mount Saint Crossing exuded a blood-red glow, making the people of Sacred Cliff College extremely nervous. However, the following scene caused the entire world to fall silent. In practically an instant, the crimson radiance turned golden. The entire Mount Saint Crossing was dyed with golden light, like a golden mountain. Countless golden petals fell from the void. At the foot of Mount Saint Crossing, golden lotuses bloomed. Flowers rained from the sky and golden lotuses sprouted from the ground. It was the scene of a saint. What's going on? All the onlookers were dumbfounded. Just now, they thought that Yi Guqin was about to fail and would be teleported out. However, in an instant, the situation was reversed, and golden light overflowed. There were even strange phenomena like flowers raining from the sky and golden lotuses sprouted from the ground. Flowers raining from the sky and golden lotuses sprouted from the ground. This is the scene of a saint. Rumor has it that the true dragon of Haoyan, Di Haoyan, has such a phenomenon. That's why he's considered to have the bearing of a saint. Could it be that Dubai? Many martial artists' expressions froze as they looked at each other. For words appeared in their minds at the same time. A natural saint. There was only one explanation for Mount Saint Crossing to be able to produce such a phenomenon. Yi Guqin had passed the 20th level and become a natural saint. Thinking of this, the hundreds of thousands of martial artists present were petrified, and their eyes were filled with extreme shock and disbelief. Even Jianke, Jian Shisan, and Purple, who was first on the sword roll, could not pass the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing. It was known as a forbidden area for martial artists. How could Yi Guqin, a six-stage heaven and earth spirit bridge prodigy, pass it? Moreover, everyone saw on the light screen that Yi Guqin's figure was drowned by the heavenly tribulation, and there was almost no possibility of him passing it. How was it possible that he could break through all of a sudden? Chapter 973. No. I don't believe it, I absolutely don't believe it. Ouyang Tianji's eyes were bloodshot, unwilling to believe it at all. It had not been easy for him to break through to the divine dwelling stage, but he had only passed the 9th level. Yi Guqin, a 6th level heaven-earth spirit bridge cultivator, how could he pass the 20th level? He roared, unwilling to believe everything in front of him. Let alone him, even Ouyang Fenyun's eyes were filled with shock. If the truth was not in front of him, he would never believe it. The 20th level, is it possible? On the Hua family's side, Hua Wuxiu let out a deep breath. He had broken through the 18th level of Saint Crossing Mountain. It could be said that his glory was unparalleled. If there were no accidents, Hua Wuxiu's fame would soar to another level. But at the moment, Saint Crossing Mountain was filled with flowers and golden lotuses. In comparison, Hua Wuxiu's result of the 18th level seemed insignificant. At this moment, Yi Guqin's opponents were all extremely nervous. Everyone was waiting for a result. They were waiting for Yi Guqin to come out of Saint Crossing Mountain. While everyone was anxiously waiting, the space at the top of Saint Crossing Mountain distorted. A figure walked out with his hands clasped behind his back. He was dressed in a black robe that was not tainted by a speck of dust. His face was calm and relaxed, unlike Hua Wuxiu, Ouyang Fengyun and the others who had broken through the mountain. It was Yi Guqin. At this moment, Yi Guqin not only did not look the slightest bit embarrassed, but his spirit was clear and his eyes were bright like stars. He seemed to be in a better state than before. This scene made the hundreds of thousands of cultivators speechless. They even had the illusion that Yi Guqin had gone in for a leisurely stroll and then came out. At this moment, Yi Guqin's figure was straight as a ramrod as he stood on the top of St. Crossing Mountain. The surrounding flowers and golden lotuses made Yi Guqin look like a natural saint king, majestic and imposing. All eyes were on him. Countless gazes were fixed on Yi Guqin like iron meeting a magnet. Although the abnormality of Mount St. Crossing had more or less indicated the result. But everyone still wanted to hear Yi Guqin's confirmation with their own ears. What was the result? Little friend Dugu, what's the result? Even with great elder Imei's calm personality, he could not help but swallow a mouthful of saliva at this moment. He looked at Yi Guqin with anticipation. Sacred Cliff College had been quiet for too long. They desperately needed a leader of the younger generation to lead Sacred Cliff College to greatness. Fortunately, I did not disappoint you. Yi Guqin cupped his hands and smiled. As soon as these words were spoken, the entire Mount St. Crossing fell into a deathly silence that was suffocating. Countless people's eyes widened, and their bodies trembled slightly. Yi Guqin had succeeded. He had passed the 20th level of Mount St. Crossing, which was known as a forbidden area. He had done something that Jian Kuei, Jian Shisan, and even the number 1 on the sword leaderboard, Z, had never done. He had completely passed Mount St. Crossing and become a natural saint. After a short moment of silence, there was an uproar that could shatter the heavens. Countless sounds of shock and exclamations surged in all directions like a tide breaking a dam. Today, they had witnessed a miracle that belonged to Mount St. Crossing, Sacred Cliff College, and the Sword Dynasty. Senior brother Dugu is mighty. All the Sacred Cliff College disciples went crazy. Their eyes were scarlet, and their voices were hoarse. Sacred Cliff College had been suppressed by Tensei College and other major colleges for far too long. Even Holy Emblem disciple Ling Emoshu had been defeated by Hua Wuxiu. It could be said that all the Sacred Cliff College disciples were extremely sullen. In the Sword Dynasty, Sacred Cliff College's disciples were inferior to the other colleges. But today, their Sacred Cliff College's genius, Yi Guqin, was destined to shake the entire Sword Dynasty. Even in the Nantian region, he would have a place. After all, what did it mean for Yi Guqin to pass Mount St. Crossing? It meant that if Yi Guqin didn't fall in the future, he was destined to become a saint. Yi Guqin was a natural saint. Xingzhu has always believed in Master. Mu Xingzhu was so excited that tears welled up in her eyes. Her master was indeed her master. No matter where he was, no matter how he hid his identity, his brilliance would never be buried. He really succeeded. Ling Moyin's delicate body trembled, and her heart was filled with mixed feelings. She was excited about Yi Guqin's success, but she also felt ashamed of her previous attitude. Dugubai, here's to you. Ling Emoshu smiled faintly. After his cultivation was crippled, Ling Emoshu's face never smiled again. But at this moment, he smiled. He was happy for Yi Guqin and Sacred Cliff College from the bottom of his heart. Han Lingxian, Kong Kong, Xuanlian, and the others were also happy for Yi Guqin. As for Jiang Yan, his face was as pale as a sheet of paper, without a trace of blood. Now, are all of you still doubting Brother Dugu's ability? Saber 9 let out a long laugh from the horizon. Jian Wu and the 7th swordsman were silent. Even Jian Shi, who had some doubts about Yi Guqin before, was speechless at this moment. What else could they say? Yi Guqin's performance had surpassed Jian Shisan's. Jiang Fengmian and Shangguan Jingshan's expressions froze at this moment. Jiang Fengmian had a complicated look in his eyes. He shook his head and sighed. Xingzhu, your master is really extraordinary. Shangguan Jingshan's face was no longer as arrogant as before. After all, no one had the right to be arrogant in front of a natural-born saint. Cousin, did Duguwubai really make it through? Shengguan Yan's eyes widened in disbelief. It should be. Mount Saint Crossing is a special arcane realm. No one can take advantage of it, Shengguan Jingshan said in a low voice. Some of Yi Guchen's enemies could do nothing about it even if they did not want to believe it. Mount Saint Crossing would not be faked. If there were other ways to pass it, then there would be people who could reach the top after so many years. Therefore, even if the Hua family did not want to admit it, they could not say that Yi Guchen cheated at this moment. Hua Yuntao's face was extremely cold. Dark clouds gathered in between his eyebrows and he did not say a word. He did not expect this at all. Not only did the bet not go as he wished, but it also made Yi Guchen's reputation. This is impossible. I must be dreaming. As for Hua Xingjie, Hua Tengfei in Wufeng Yushuang Yan, and the others, their faces were ashen at this moment. He was a natural-born saint. In the entire Sword Dynasty, only Yi Guchen had received this title at this moment. Now, they faced Yi Guchen with more fear than hatred. Over at Tianxian College, even Wu Hongyan's delicate and beautiful face was in a state of shock. She also did not expect Yi Guchen to have such a result. As for Suki Miyazaki, who hated Yi Guchen, she was completely speechless at this moment. She could not say anything else to belittle him. What a joke! Did she have the right to look down on a natural-born saint? Even Jian Jinghong, who she admired, did not have the right to do so. Ha! I heard someone say that if Dugu succeeds in the end, you will twist your heads off and let me kick them like a ball. Qin Jin laughed heartily. Although the Purple Smoke Lord and the Yellow Dragon Lord were venerables, they were dumbfounded at this moment. Their eyes were blank. They were terrified at this moment. With Yi Guchen's identity as a natural-born saint, Sacred Cliff College would definitely do its best to cultivate and protect him. It could be said that Yi Guchen held grudges. With one word, he could make the Purple Smoke Lord and the Yellow Dragon Lord miserable. Now, the two lords no longer had their previous disdain. Their eyes were full of fear. Chapter 974. At this moment, Yi Guchen's enemies were all ashen, as if they had lost their parents. Yi Guchen had created the impossible. He had broken through 20 levels of the Saint Ascension Bridge at the 6th stage of the Heaven and Earth Spirit Bridge. No one in the Sword Dynasty could do that. The result of the bet has been decided. Hua Yuntao, shouldn't you fulfill your promise? Yi Guchen stood alone at the top of Mount Saint Ascension, with his hands behind his back, looking indifferent. At this moment, his temperament was not much weaker than Hua Yuntao's. Of course, it was just the spirit of an expert. Yi Guchen's real cultivation was not comparable to Hua Yuntao's. Hearing Yi Guchen's words, the hundreds of thousands of warriors around were speechless. Yi Guchen was probably the only person who dared to call a false saint expert by his name without the slightest respect. However, Yi Guchen did not care. He was not a rude person, but it was relative. At the selection of the 5 academies, Hua Yuntao relied on his false saint cultivation and was very powerful. If Wu Hongyan had not intervened, he would have been forcibly admitted to Tensei College. Yi Guchen did not need to be polite to such a person. Ah, good, the younger generation will surpass us in time. Hua Yuntao was so angry that he laughed. Even with his false saint state of mind, he still had such an expression, which showed how angry he was. Hua Yuntao was a false saint expert of the Hua family and the first elder of Tensei College. Such an identity could be said to be one of the top existences in the Sword Dynasty. However, now he had been slapped in the face by a junior and lost the bet. Hua Yuntao's mood could be imagined. Tiske, the newborn calf is not afraid of the tiger. How dare he talk to a false saint expert with such an attitude? Sigh, he is a natural saint. So what if he is a natural saint? He will be a saint if he can grow up. If he can't, he will still be a dead man. Whispers could be heard around Mount Saint Crossing. Most of them were shocked and impressed by Yi Guchen's performance. However, there were still a small number of warriors and geniuses who felt a little jealous. Some people just couldn't bear to see others doing well. It was natural that people would be jealous of someone who was born a saint. Hua Yuntao's expression turned cold. Yi Guchen's disdain for his dignity made his killing intent surge. However, no matter how angry Hua Yuntao was, he could not attack Yiguchen in front of more than 400,000 martial artists. Not to mention Wu Hongyan, Grand Elder Imei, and the others. It's just a bone-molding Saint pill, Hua Yuntao said with a cold face. With a flick of his finger, the jade bottle containing the bone-molding Saint pill flew out. A bone-sculpting Saint pill was indeed nothing to Hua Yuntao. He cared more about his face. Yiguchen received the jade bottle. After confirming that there was nothing wrong with it, he stored it into his origin ring. Thank you. Although Hua Yuntao was disgusting, he still fulfilled his promise. Yiguchen smiled faintly. He had finally obtained one of the 3 main materials to refine his doppelganger. Only the Soul Source Crystal and the Longevity Wood Core were left. When the 3 materials were gathered, Yiguchen could use the half-pure demon body in the God Devourer sword to refine his doppelganger. At that time, he could try to use the God Devourer sword. Yiguchen's trip to Mount St. Crossing this time could be said to be a successful one. The gains were too great. Not to mention the other gains, just the Saint Path Law empowerment was a priceless opportunity that could not be measured by any price. Even false saints would be envious of the Saint Path Law empowerment. Just as Yiguchen was about to return to Sacred Cliff College's ship, Hua Yuntao spoke again. Dugubai, I'll give you another chance to join Tensei College. You're a natural saint, and the college will do its best to cultivate you. Sacred Cliff College can't compare to Tensei College's resources. In the face of this solicitation, all the warriors around looked at Yiguchen. Now that Sacred Cliff College was declining, Tensei College's resources were indeed much better than Sacred Cliff College's. When the people of Sacred Cliff College heard this, their hearts tightened. Ling Moyne in particular bit her lip. They were afraid that Yiguchen would abandon Sacred Cliff College. Yiguchen heard this and said indifferently, now that things have come to this, there's no need to say such things. During the selection of the 5 academies, Yiguchen had almost fallen out with the Hua family and Tensei College. There was no need for this at all. Looking at Yiguchen's attitude, the people of Sacred Cliff College were relieved. Is that so? Hua Yuntao narrowed his old eyes slightly and then said, my Hua family has some records. Rumor has it that if one passes through the 20th level of Mount St. Crossing, there will be a special great opportunity, which is suspected to be related to a saint. When Hua Yuntao's words fell, the noisy atmosphere of Mount St. Crossing froze in an instant. All the noise was silenced. All eyes fell on Yiguchen in unison. That gaze seemed to be able to pierce through him. Any opportunity, as long as it was related to a saint, was no small matter. Feeling the countless burning gazes around him, Yiguchen's expression did not change, but his mind was slightly focused. He did not expect the Hua family to have such information. However, it was obvious that the Hua family's records were very vague, and Hua Yuntao did not know about the Saint Path Law enlightenment. Otherwise, if he knew, Hua Yuntao would have made a big move long ago. After all, the Saint Path Law was too tempting for a false saint. I passed through the 20th level of Mount St. Crossing and did not encounter any abnormalities. Yiguchen shook his head slightly. He naturally could not tell them about the Saint Path Law enlightenment. If this matter was leaked, trouble would ensue. Yiguchen believed that with Hua Yuntao's character as a false saint, he would do anything in order to become a saint. Hearing Yiguchen's words, many warriors around were also skeptical. Firstly, they had not heard of such records. Secondly, when Yiguchen appeared, there was no special aura on him. Hua Yuntao's expression was uncertain. In fact, he was not sure. There were vague records in the Hua family's library, but it did not say what it was or whether it existed. After all, Yiguchen was the first to reach the 20th level, and there was no other precedent. However, Hua Yuntao obviously would not let it go. He continued, "Do you think you don't have it just because you say so? Hand over your origin ring and search it. Perhaps the Hua family has a soul-searching formation that can also search for abnormalities in your body." These words made Yiguchen's expression suddenly turn cold. Hua Yuntao actually wanted him to hand over his origin ring and even search his soul. "Elder Hua, you've gone too far." Great Elder Imei stood up and said, since Yiguchen had chosen Sacred Cliff College, Great Elder Yi Mei naturally had to stand up for Yiguchen. I'm just making a small suggestion. I didn't say that I wanted to harm him. Don't tell me I don't even have the face to do that? Hua Yuntao simply threw caution to the wind. Yiguchen was born to be a sage. No matter what, Hua Yuntao was not willing to let him go. If Yiguchen was allowed to grow up in Sacred Cliff College, who knew what accidents would happen in the future and whether it would affect the Hua family and other false sage families? Old man Hua, you've really gone too far. Wu Hongyan also took a step forward. Hua Yuntao's old face stiffened when a false sage expert stepped in to help Yiguchen. However, at this moment, in the distant void, 4 auras erupted at the same time. Every aura was not weaker than Wu Hongyan's or Hua Yuntao's. 4 false sages had appeared at the same time. Chapter 975. In the distant sky, 4 figures appeared from the void at the same time. Previously, they had been observing in the dark, but they did not show themselves. It was not until Yiguchen passed the 20th floor that the 4 false saint experts were surprised. But now, when Hua Yuntao pointed out that passing the 20th floor might be related to the opportunity of becoming a saint, the 4 finally showed up. That's the head of the Shengguan family, Shengguan Bo. Someone saw a middle-aged man in a purple python robe among the 4 and could not help but say. And the head elder of the Yin family, Yin Lengshan. Some people looked at a black-robed elder with a gloomy face and felt a chill in their hearts. The head elder of the Ouyang family, Ouyang Su. Among the 4, a golden-robed elder with his hands in his sleeves squinted slightly. And the deputy head of the Jiang family, Jiang Wu. Some people looked at a red-robed man who looked strong and powerful among the 4. Apart from the Hua family, the other 4 false saint families of the Sword Dynasty had all sent experts. You're finally willing to show up. Hua Yuntao sneered. On the other side, Wu Hongyan's charming face froze slightly, and her expression was slightly solemn. Head Elder Imei's expression was extremely solemn. Those who came did not come with good intentions, and those with good intentions did not come. The 4 false saint experts chose to show up at this moment naturally had their reasons. Strictly speaking, these 4 experts were all from the aristocratic family camp, and were completely different from the rogue cultivator camp. There are geniuses in every generation. To think that our Sword Dynasty could produce such a genius. Congratulations. The head of the Shengguan family, Shengguan Bo, who was wearing a purple python robe, smiled faintly, but his smile was cold. Indeed, it's a pity that such a talent is in Sacred Cliff College. Yin Lingshan shook his head. The 4 of you, what do you mean by this? Head Elder Imei asked in a low voice. Imei, you can't say anything here. The head elder of the Ouyang family, Ouyang Su, narrowed his eyes. They were all false saint experts, and head elder Imei was a 9th-tier venerable. Wu Hongyan raised her head and said, So, why are you here? Are you ganging up on a junior? She was also a false saint of the itinerant cultivator camp. Naturally, she did not get along well with the false saints of the aristocratic families. Dean Wu, you're wrong. We're just curious as to what kind of fortuitous encounter this kid obtained on the 20th floor, said Jiang Wu, the vice head of the Jiang clan. I've already said before that I didn't obtain anything. The 20th floor is just a checkpoint. Facing the questioning of the 5 false saint experts, Yiguchen was calm. Yiguchen's heart was calmer at times like this. Even if Mt. Tai collapsed in front of him, his expression would not change. If he revealed even the slightest abnormality, the 5 experts would be able to easily grasp the clues. At that time, if the Saint Dao laws were exposed, Yiguchen would be in great trouble and danger. Looking at Yiguchen's expressionless face, Jiang Wu, Ouyang Su, and the other false saint experts who appeared later all had a trace of suspicion in their eyes. In fact, they didn't know what kind of fortuitous encounters awaited on the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing. They weren't even sure if there were any. It was just that the sage fortuitous encounter was too important for them. Even if there was only a slight chance, they wouldn't want to miss it. In that case, hand over your origin ring and search it. Then go to the Hua family and enter the God-searching formation for inspection, Hua Yuntao said coldly. Whether Yi Guchen obtained the sage fortuitous encounter or not, Hua Yuntao would not let it go. He couldn't let a natural saint grow up safely and threaten the safety of the Hua family. I can do that, but why should I? Yi Guchen stood with his hands behind his back, his black hair fluttering in the wind. He faced the 5 false saints coldly without the slightest cowardice. Tisk, as expected of the sword demon Dugubai. Yi Guchen's character was admired by many martial artists. Humph, contradicting a false saint. You won't even know how you died. Ouyang Tianji and the others sneered disdainfully. So what if he was a natural saint? As long as he hadn't grown up, it was all empty talk. Because I'm a false saint. Hua Yuntao's aura was released, surging like a vast ocean. Although a false saint expert had the word false, it was related to the word saint after all. No one could ignore the power and majesty of a false saint. Yi Guchen felt a sense of oppression like an ancient mountain pressing down on him, making him groan in his chest. But his spine was still straight, and he didn't flinch at all. Enough, old man Hua. You've come back alive. Wu Hongyan waved her hand. At this moment, Ouyang Su and the other false saints stepped out at the same time. Dean Wu, we're not trying to make things difficult for this guy. What's wrong with a little inspection? The innocent will be cleared, Shangguan Bo said with a faint smile. Dugu Wubai is a disciple of Sacred Cliff College. Great Elder Yi Mei and the 5 temple masters stepped forward bravely. However, they were facing Hua Yuntao and the other false saints. The realm of a venerable was still a little weak, and they didn't have enough confidence. Looking at the two sides confronting each other, the martial artists around Mount St. Crossing moved a little further away. And the lords of the various places also clearly divided into 2 camps, the independent cultivators and the aristocratic cultivators. But overall, there were obviously more lords recruited by the aristocratic cultivators than the independent cultivators. Between heaven and earth, there was a strong smell of gunpowder. Just as the atmosphere was tense, an old voice with a hint of coldness spread out. Why would a disciple of Sacred Cliff College need to be manipulated by you? Hearing this voice, Hua Yuntao and the other false saints all frowned. Yi Guchen felt a slight sense of familiarity, and a hint of surprise flashed in his eyes. In the distance, a limping old man with white hair and beard, holding a walking stick, stepped on the clouds and came over. His white beard fluttered in the wind, and he looked like an immortal with an extraordinary temperament. It was the old man who Yi Guchen had occasionally asked for wine in the inn of Thunder City. Heavens, that's the dean of Divine Cliff College, Ken Fusey. Seeing the limping old man arrive, some martial artists couldn't help but exclaim. The dean of Divine Cliff College, Ken Fusey, was a famous false saint expert of the Sword Dynasty. His strength was one of the best even among the false saints. So that's how it is, Yi Guchen murmured. Although he had guessed that the old man who knew his true identity was probably a little extraordinary. But he didn't expect it to be the mysterious dean of Sacred Cliff College, Ken Fusey. And this Ken Fusey, how did he know Yi Guchen's identity? After thinking about it, Yi Guchen felt that he might have been exposed to some big shots. However, since Ken Fusey didn't reveal his identity, it proved that, at least for now, Ken Fusey didn't have any malicious intentions towards Yi Guchen. Master Jian, even a mysterious old man like you is here. Hua Yuntao's face was slightly unnatural. Master Jian, you're here too. The reason was because he had been defeated by Ken Fusey. As false saints, it might be difficult to determine life and death, but it was too easy to determine victory and defeat. If I didn't come, would I just watch my disciples be humiliated? Ken Fusey glanced at Hua Yuntao and the other 4. Ouyang Su, Shangguan Bo, and the other false saints also had a slightly solemn expression. But fortunately, they had 5 false saints on their side, so they weren't too afraid of Ken Fusey. Ken Fusey, I can forgive this boy's rudeness, but he must be tested. Hua Yuntao refused to budge. The other 4 false saints were also a little curious about whether Yi Guchen had obtained any opportunities. Moreover, since Yi Guchen had completely joined Sacred Cliff College, he was an enemy of the aristocratic families. Ouyang Su and the others also didn't want to watch this natural saint grow up safely. With all these reasons added together, the 5 false saints were unwilling to let Yi Guchen go. What if I refuse? Confuzi said lightly, leaning on his walking stick. Wu Hongyan also quietly stood beside Confuzi. I'll offend you. The 5 false saints burst out their auras at the same time, like 5 volcanoes erupting. A great battle was about to break out. Chapter 976. On one side was Hua Yuntao and the other false saint experts from the 5 aristocratic families. On the other side was Confuzi, Wu Hongyan, and a group of Sacred Cliff College temple masters and elders. The thick smell of gunpowder permeated the surroundings, as if a single spark was enough to ignite the entire situation. Is the civil war about to begin? Many warriors hurriedly retreated into the distance for fear of being implicated. Some Sword Dynasty warriors were also worried. If a civil war between false saints broke out on Mount Saint Crossing, the consequences and impact would be immeasurable. The Sword Dynasty was already in danger due to internal and external troubles. If such a thing happened, it would definitely cause a great turmoil. Sigh. In the sky, Kenpo and the other 4 sword sons also retreated into the distance. There was no room for them to intervene in such a great battle. If the Alliance Master was still here, these false saint aristocratic families wouldn't be so arrogant, Jian Shi said coldly. I didn't expect such a conflict to occur. Kenpo was also very worried. No one expected that Yi Guchen alone would cause such an extreme conflict. Even Yi Guchen himself was frowning. To be honest, he didn't want such a conflict to occur. Yi Guchen still wanted to develop in the Sword Dynasty peacefully. If the Sword Dynasty itself was shaken due to internal strife, it would undoubtedly affect Yi Guchen's cultivation and growth. You've gone too far. Confuzi shook the void with his walking stick. In an instant, a terrifying transparent sword energy soared into the sky and swept out, causing the void to tremble endlessly. Wu Hongyan also waved one hand, and true energy surged out, shaking the void. Although false saint experts could not tear the void at will like real heavenly tribulation saints, they could still affect the space and cause great vibration and destruction. In addition, the 5 temple masters of Sacred Cliff College, First Elder Imei, and the others also attacked at the same time. Although their attacks weren't as powerful as those of false saints, it was still a force to be reckoned with. On the other side, Hua Yuntao and the other 4 pseudo-saints all looked cold and attacked at the same time. The 5 false saints attacked at the same time. Even if they did not use their full strength, the power was enough to make hundreds of thousands of warriors in the distance shudder. Rumble. Above the vault of heaven, 2 huge torrents of energy burst forth and were about to collide in the next moment. Time seemed to freeze at this moment. The hearts of the surrounding 400,000 martial artists were in their throats. It was at this critical juncture. Suddenly, a deep and quiet voice that sounded like a deep valley rang out. You guys have really brought honor to my Sword Dynasty. A figure appeared in the distant sky. He seemed to be walking very slowly on the clouds, but in the blink of an eye, he landed in the middle of the collision between the 2 torrents of energy. That was a peerlessly handsome man with black hair and white robes. He looked as insignificant as an immortal, floating and otherworldly. He had a wine gourd on his waist and a red umbrella in one hand. Although he was standing at the center of the collision between the 2 torrents of energy, there was not the slightest ripple on his face. The man raised his hand and the red umbrella floated in the void. He stretched his left hand toward Confuzi and his right hand toward Hua Yuntao. Boom! The 2 torrents of energy were directly blocked by the man's 2 hands. The terrifying sword chi burst forth in the void, but it could not escape from the man's control. Even Yi Guchen's eyes were secretly shocked. That was a joint attack of the false saint experts. Even though Hua Yuntao and the others did not use their full strength, they could not withstand the attack of so many people. The terrifying torrents of energy were easily blocked by the man. Strong energy waves rolled and collided between the man's palms. After a series of roars, the void returned to silence. The man raised one hand and the red umbrella floating in the void fell back into his hand. Greetings, Deputy Alliance Leader. Confuzi cupped his hands and said, Lord Sword King. Wu Hongyan's beautiful eyes lit up, and she immediately revealed a love-struck look. Deputy Alliance Leader. The faces of Hua Yuntao and the others also froze. It's Deputy Alliance Leader, Lord Heavenly Sentiment. Greetings, Deputy Alliance Leader. After a brief moment of silence, the hundreds of thousands of warriors cupped their hands together and their voices resounded between heaven and earth. He is the Deputy Alliance Leader of the Sword Principal Alliance, Sword King Heavenly Sentiment. Yi Guchen suddenly understood the man's identity. Greetings, Deputy Alliance Leader. Kenpo and the other four sword sons also cupped their hands and bowed. Heavenly Sentiment nodded slightly and glanced at Hua Yuntao and the others. Hua Yuntao and the others looked a little unnatural. Sword King Heavenly Sentiment was the strongest false saint expert in the Sword Dynasty besides the Alliance Leader, Proud Divine Prefecture. Otherwise, he would not have been able to guard the Sword Dynasty alone for so long. The reason why these false saint families did not dare to go too far was because of Heavenly Sentiment. Otherwise, the entire Sword Dynasty would have fallen into civil strife long ago. You guys are really powerful. As false saints, you want to fight so casually. Where is the dignity of the Sword Principal Alliance? Heavenly Sentiment's usual warm personality was a little cold at this moment. We don't dare. This old man is just. Hua Yuntao cupped his hand slightly. Although there was a dark shadow in his eyes, he held it in. Heavenly Sentiment's deterrence was great. No matter what, they were still part of the Sword Principal Alliance. They could not openly contradict Heavenly Sentiment. I already know the situation. The matter of Mount Saint Crossing is over. Let's disperse. Heavenly Sentiment said lightly. This. Hua Yuntao and the others were stunned, but in the end, they did not make a move. They knew that with Heavenly Sentiment, the false saint families could no longer do anything to Yi Guchen. By the way, since Dugubai has passed the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing, he will not only receive the title of a natural saint, but also be a disciple of the holy emblem recognized by the 5 academies. If anyone dares to violate the rules and attack him, don't blame me for being impolite. Heavenly Sentiment's gaze swept over Hua Yuntao and the others. We don't dare. Hua Yuntao's old face twitched, and a murderous intent flashed in his eyes. Very good. Heavenly Sentiment nodded lightly. Looking at Heavenly Sentiment, who had resolved the crisis with just a few words, Yi Guchen secretly sighed. She was indeed the famous sword sovereign of the Sword Dynasty. Many of the Sword Dynasty warriors around cast reverent gazes at Heavenly Sentiment. If Heavenly Sentiment had not stabilized the situation of the Sword Dynasty, they, the warriors of the Sword Dynasty, would have been in deep trouble. Therefore, most of the warriors of the Sword Dynasty were extremely respectful to Heavenly Sentiment. Of course, the warriors of the aristocratic families were an exception. If it were not for Heavenly Sentiment, the 5 false saint families would have unified the Sword Dao Alliance. With Heavenly Sentiment, the conflict on Mount Saint Crossing was temporarily over. Of course, Hua Yuntao was unwilling, but it was useless. Seeing this, Hua Wuxiu's eyes flashed and he stepped forward. He looked at Yi Guchen and said lightly, Dugubai, you are indeed unexpected, but talent does not represent strength. The 5 academies competition is not far away. I am also very curious, how strong are you, a natural saint? Chapter 977. Hua Wuxiu's words made everyone silent for a moment, and then aroused a lot of discussion. Indeed, Yi Guchen's talent had passed the test of Mount Saint Crossing, and no one would doubt it anymore. If he continued to grow, he might not become a saint, but there was no doubt that he would at least become a false saint. But talent was talent, and it could not be equated with strength. Everyone had seen the test of the 20th floor of Mount Saint Crossing. It was more of a test of spiritual will than a test of strength. Yi Guchen had passed the 20th floor, but it did not mean that his battle strength was stronger than Hua Wuxiu's at the 18th floor. Everyone knew that Yi Guchen's realm was only at the 6th stage of the Heaven and Earth Spirit Bridge. At this level, even with the help of magic weapons like the 9-Dragon Thunder Prison, how strong could he be? Yes, if Hua Wuxiu hadn't mentioned it, I wouldn't have thought that Dugu Wubai's current strength was not the top among the geniuses of the Sword Dynasty, right? Indeed, the top 3 of the sword ranking should not be weaker than Dugu Wubai, not to mention those sword sons. Not to mention the top 3 of the sword ranking, can Dugu Wubai beat Shangguan Jingshan, Jiangfeng Yan, and the others? I heard that before in the ancient Chaos Wilderness, Dugu Wubai and Ouyang Fengyun fought to a draw. Hua Wuxiu's words caused many people to come to their senses. Especially Shangguan Jingshan. After Yi Guqin had passed the 20th floor, Shangguan Jingshan's face was no longer arrogant, but filled with extreme fear. But now, when he thought about it, it was indeed so. Yi Guqin had not fully grown, and although he was a threat, there was no need to be too afraid. Thinking of this, Shangguan Jingshan's face regained confidence. He said, "Brother Hua is right. Talent is not equal to strength. Dugu Wubai, I, Shangguan Jingshan, will definitely challenge you in the 5 academies competition. And I, Jiang Fengmian, also want to fight with Brother Dugu if possible in the 5 academies competition." Jiang Fengmian smiled faintly. "You too?" Mu Xingzu frowned. Obviously, they were targeting Yi Guqin because of Mu Xingzu. "Miss Mu, if Dugu Wubai can defeat me, I won't pester you anymore and let the 2 of you be together." Shangguan Jingshan spoke, his tone full of confidence in himself. Yi Guqin frowned slightly. He and Mu Xingzu did not have that kind of relationship, and he did not want to interfere with Mu Xingzu's feelings. When Mu Xingzu heard this, a faint blush appeared on her pink face. She lowered her head and did not speak. To be honest, Mu Xingzu's feelings for Yi Guqin were mostly respect and admiration for her benefactor and master. However, it was impossible to say that there was no trace of love in it. After all, Mu Xingzu was a young girl in the prime of her youth, and Yi Guqin's performance was so outstanding all the way. If it were any other young girl, it would be difficult to resist Yi Guqin's charm. Yi Guqin pondered for a moment and looked at Mu Xingzu. "Xingzhu, do you like him?" Mu Xingzu raised her small head and glanced at Shangguan Jingshan. Her clear eyes were full of annoyance, and she shook her head. "Well, I will help you eliminate him in the 5 academies competition." Yi Guqin stroked Mu Xingzu's head. It seemed to be a casual remark, but it stunned everyone. No matter how bad Shangguan Jingshan was, he was still the 7th divine dwelling heaven's pride on the sword list. Yi Guqin was probably the only one who could say such words in such a relaxed manner. "Okay, I'll wait." Shangguan Jingshan was so angry that he laughed. Regardless of what Yi Guqin would do in the future, at least for now, he could not completely make Shangguan Jingshan fear him. "Let's go." Hua Yuntao glanced coldly at Yi Guqin, flicked his sleeves, and left. "Dugu Wubai, I hope you can retain the honor of being a natural saint in the 5 academies competition." Hua Wuxiu smiled faintly and also left. Obviously, he meant that Yi Guqin would be defeated in the 5 academies competition. If Yi Guqin was defeated by others, no matter who the opponent was, it would have an impact on the prestige of being a natural saint. This was also the drag brought by honor. Yi Guqin did not care about Hua Wuxiu's threat. He had seen too many powerful opponents. Moreover, Yi Guqin had gained a lot this time, and by the time the 5 academies competition came, his strength would definitely improve again. With the departure of the Hua family, the other aristocratic families also left. Ouyang Tianji, Yushuang Yan, Yin Wufeng, and the others no longer dared to face Yi Guqin. Perhaps a heaven's pride on the level of Hua Wuxiu was not afraid of Yi Guqin, but they could not. With the departure of the aristocratic families, the atmosphere of the entire Mount St. Crossing also relaxed in an instant. Yi Tianqing looked at Yi Guqin with faint admiration. "Thank you for your help, Deputy Alliance Leader." Yi Guqin cupped his hands. This time, without Yi Tianqing's help, even if Confuzi and Wu Hongyan were there, it was estimated that Hua Yuntao and the others would not give up. "I just dealt with it fairly. Do you feel wrong that I did not punish those aristocratic families this time?" Yi Tianqing smiled faintly. "No, strength is everything. If I had strength, I would not be afraid of anything." Yi Guqin smiled and did not mind. "I really did not misjudge you. Well, let's go back first." Yi Tianqing waved her hand. Then Yi Tianqing and the people of Sacred Cliff College and Tianxian College left together. The matter of Mount St. Crossing had finally come to an end. However, it was conceivable that Yi Guqin's feat of breaking through the 20th floor of Mount St. Crossing would definitely sweep through the entire Sword Dynasty and even the surrounding dynasties like a wildfire. After all, the title of the natural saint was really famous. Of course, there were also many warriors who were curious about Yi Guqin's performance in the 5 Academies tournament. Would the legend of the natural saint fall in the 5 Academies tournament? On the other side, among the aristocratic families who left, Hua Yuntao's expression was cold. Hua Wuxiu said faintly, "Old Hua, don't worry. I will definitely make you lose face in the 5 Academies tournament." Although killing is not allowed in the 5 Academies tournament, if there is a chance, destroy that evil creature. Hua Yuntao said with a gloomy look. Yi Guqin's talent always made Hua Yuntao feel uneasy. If Yi Guqin was completely destroyed, it would be once and for all. Of course, Dugu Wubai will be more miserable than Ling Emoshu. Hua Wuxiu said confidently. And Yi Tianqing, how long does he think he can suppress the 5 aristocratic families? It won't be long before he dies, and the 5 aristocratic families will completely take over the Sword Dao Alliance. My Hua family will be the leader and create a new era of aristocratic families. Hua Yuntao said coldly in his heart. At the thought of that plan, Hua Yuntao's lips curled into a cold smile. How could the 5 aristocratic families, which had pseudo-saint experts, be willing to be suppressed by Yi Tianqing? The turmoil of the Sword Dynasty had just begun. On the other side, on the top of a mountain, a figure with a strange purple mask stood with his hands behind his back. His long purple hair fluttered in the air, and his momentum was extremely powerful. Natural saint? Interesting, but how strong is your real strength? Back then, the only opponent that I really valued was Di Haotian, a 10th grade supreme talent. And between a natural saint and a 10th grade supreme talent, who is stronger? Chapter 978. The incident at Mount St. Crossing had finally come to an end. But it was conceivable that the storm had just spread and would not die down in a short time. Many sword cultivators in the Sword Dynasty were also very curious. How strong was the strongest Heaven's Pride who had passed the 20th level of Mount St. Crossing, a natural saint? How would he perform in the 5 Academies competition? Many people could not help but begin to look forward to it. After the incident at Mount St. Crossing was over, Yi Guqin and the others returned to Sacred Cliff College. Sword Sovereign Yi Tianqing also left. Along the way, Wu Hongyan, who had always been violent and straightforward, seemed to have changed from a tomboy to a delicate and shy beauty, chatting with Yi Tianqing from time to time. Looking at Wu Hongyan's feminine appearance, the people around were not quite used to it. Especially some of the female disciples of Tianxian College. It was the first time they saw their dean like this. Yi Guqin also understood that the Sword King that Wu Hongyan was talking about was referring to Yi Tianqing. However, Yi Tianqing did not have any feelings for Wu Hongyan. Most of the time, he just leaned against the side of the ship alone, holding a wine gourd and drinking alone. This made Wu Hongyan's beautiful eyes slightly dim, and she felt a little disappointed. Yi Tianqing was a person with a story. Not long after, the group returned to Sacred Cliff College. Come here. Yi Tianqing beckoned Yi Guqin to come over and talk alone. Seeing this scene, the surrounding disciples of Sacred Cliff College showed a look of envy. It was obvious that Yi Tianqing treated Yi Guqin differently. If he could be appreciated by the deputy leader of the Sword Dynasty, he naturally did not have to worry about his future. Yi Guqin nodded slightly and followed Yi Tianqing to a secluded place. The dean of the Divine Cliff College, Confuzi, was also there. Ha, little friend Yi, I didn't drink the wine for free, right? Confuzi looked at Yi Guqin and said with a smile. Thank you for your help, seniors. Yi Guqin cupped his hands. Oh, it seems like you're not surprised, Yi Guqin? Heavensoft raised her eyebrows slightly. Now that my identity has been exposed, there's no need to hide anything. Many thanks to the 2 seniors for not publicly exposing me. Yi Guqin did not try to hide anything. He even felt that the reason Kenfuzi knew his identity was because of heavenly sentiment. "I've known since you arrived at the Sword Dynasty," heavenly sentiment said with a faint smile. "What do you need this junior to do?" "If it's within my power, this junior will step forward bravely," Yiguchin said. He knew that Yi Tianqing naturally had her reasons for protecting him like this. He possessed the immemorial demonic sword, God Devourer, and was the target of the Starry Universe Sword Pavilion, Heavenly God Sword Sect, and other Overlord-class forces. It would be too much to say that there was no need for her to protect him like this. Straightforward. Yiguchin, to be honest, protecting you puts a lot of pressure on the Sword Dao Alliance. If your identity is exposed, the Sword Dynasty will also be targeted by the Overlord-class forces. "There is indeed a reason for protecting you," Heavensoft said. Yiguchin nodded slightly. Heavensoft's admission made him have a good impression of her. At least Heavensoft was not a hypocrite. She spoke without thinking, and when she needed Yiguchin, she would not hide anything. "Is it about Jiankui?" Yiguchin probed. The fight for Jiankui's position was naturally the most important thing for the Sword Dynasty. It was related to the game between the two camps of rogue cultivators and aristocratic families. Kenpo had also mentioned this matter to him before. This is only one of the reasons. The most important thing is the Heavenless Sword Realm. Heavensoft sighed slightly. One of the 4 great secret realms of the Sword Dynasty, the Heavenless Sword Realm? Yiguchin was slightly surprised. As the most mysterious and dangerous place of the 4 great secret realms, the name of the Heavenless Sword Realm did not need to be explained. The Heavenless Sword Realm was also one of the treasures left behind by the 7th-generation Sword Master, Nameless. Regarding the Alliance Master's matter of the proud divine continent, I think you already know. My plan is to let some talented sword cultivators go to the Heavenless Sword Realm to investigate the Alliance Master's whereabouts. Heavensoft said. This. Yiguchin frowned slightly. He was not afraid, but he did not have the slightest understanding of the Heavenless Sword Realm. Don't worry, the Heavenless Sword Realm, according to the realm and strength of the intruder, the degree of difficulty is also different. Your talent in the Sword Dao is unquestionable, and with the immemorial demon sword, it is not impossible to break in. If there is danger, you can also withdraw. There is no need to force you, Heavensoft said. Even so, I am not a coward. The 2 seniors have done me a favor, and this favor will be repaid. Yiguchin cupped his hands slightly. He was now a thorn in the side of the Star Universe Sword Pavilion, Divine Sword Sect and other Overlord-level forces. Moreover, he had the immemorial demon sword. Under such circumstances, Heavensoft not only did not covet the demon sword in his body, but also provided protection. This was definitely a great favor. One could imagine, if Heavensoft was a person like Hua Yuntao, what consequences would Yiguchin have? Moreover, if Yiguchin's identity was exposed, then what would follow would be endless escape. It would be impossible to cultivate in peace, become a sword master, and prepare for the Heaven's Pride battlefield. Therefore, Heavensoft's favor to Yiguchin was already very heavy. Well, I'm not asking you to go to the Heavenless Sword Realm now. You'd better cultivate in peace and prepare for the 5 Academies competition and the Sword Master battle. Heavensoft smiled faintly. Yiguchin nodded, and then suddenly opened his mouth. If I don't have any achievements in Mount St. Crossing, will Senior Sword King help me? Heavensoft's handsome cheeks slightly paused, and then he shook his head and laughed, spitting out a word. Yes. Thank you, I will take my leave. Yiguchin cupped his hands and left. You are indeed a meticulous little fellow. He is testing your true character. The Sword Master chuckled. Yiguchin deserves to be called the Sword Master. No wonder he can become a thorn in the side of those Overlord-level forces. I hope that he, a born saint, can quickly grow up in the Sword Dynasty. After all, there are not many peaceful days left. Heavensoft's eyes flashed with a dark light. Have those aristocratic families also begun to take action? Kenfuzi said in a deep voice. As long as you can get Big Brother out of trouble, all the conspiracies and tricks will collapse. Heavensoft said. By the way, There is also the incomplete map that this little guy brought before. Confucius' tone was slightly dignified. Well, it is related to an ancient sacred dynasty. Not only our sword dynasty, but also the war god dynasty, the Maluo dynasty, the tyrant saber dynasty, and so on. I am afraid that soon, there will be another storm. Heavensoft sighed. One wave after another, it was conceivable that a series of major events would happen next. Yi Guchen, who had just left Heavensoft, ran into Bei Xian Elder, who hurried over. Young Dugu, the school is about to hold a coronation ceremony for you as a disciple of the Holy Emblem. Bei Xian Elder said excitedly. There is no need for that. Yi Guchen said indifferently. He did not care about this kind of empty title. How can that be? A disciple of the Holy Emblem is recognized by the Supreme Emperor, and his status is second only to the 13 swordsmen. Moreover, after the coronation ceremony, you can enter the seven-sword ancient tower. Bei Xian Elder said. The seven-sword ancient tower. Yi Guchen's eyes lit up. Chapter 979. Yi Guchen did not care about his reputation, so he did not care about his status as a disciple of the Holy Emblem. However, the benefits of being a disciple of the Holy Emblem were not bad. Yi Guchen had heard from Su Fan that only disciples of the Holy Emblem could enter the seven-sword ancient tower. Not only that, Ying Ning had also said that the seven-sword ancient tower might be related to Sky Mountain. Therefore, Yi Guchen was very curious about the seven-sword ancient tower. All right then. Yi Guchen nodded. Soon, under the guidance of Bei Xian Elder, Yi Guchen arrived at a square. At this moment, there was already a sea of people in the square. Cheers and shouts could be heard without end. Some of the Sacred Cliff College disciples who were in seclusion or had other matters to attend to, so they did not go to Mount St. Crossing. They were upset that they did not witness the spectacular scene with their own eyes. Senior Dugu is here. Senior Dugu is the best. When the crowd saw Yi Guchen arrive, they were all excited and shouted at the top of their lungs. Yi Guchen had single-handedly revived the reputation of Sacred Cliff College. Dugubai, come up to the stage. Grand Elder Imei was on a high platform with a smile on his face. Yi Guchen nodded. After he went up to the stage, Grand Elder Imei took out a bright crystal emblem and handed it to Yi Guchen. Yi Guchen took it and looked at the crystal emblem. This emblem was only a symbol of one's status and had no real use. Yi Guchen did not hesitate and kept it in his origin ring. The surrounding disciples were speechless when they saw Yi Guchen's actions. However, they were already used to Yi Guchen's character. Therefore, they were not surprised. Grand Elder Imei also shook his head and smiled bitterly. To other prodigies, being a disciple of the Holy Emblem was a goal to strive for. But for Yi Guchen, it seemed that it was nothing. Cough cough. Young friend Dugu, aren't you going to wear it? Great Elder Imei coughed dryly. There's no need. Being a disciple of the Holy Emblem is just a transition. Maybe Sword Sun is a good choice. Yi Guchen shook his head. As soon as these words came out, the noisy square instantly fell into absolute silence. Xuanlian, Kong Kong, Han Lingxian, Yen Suk, Su Fan, and the others were all present. Their gazes were also strange. As expected of my master, Mu Xingzu's big eyes were full of smiles. Yi Guchen's words may have shocked a lot of people, but Mu Xingzu believed him. As expected of senior brother Dugu. Some disciples wiped the cold sweat off their foreheads and laughed dryly. But now, no one said that Yi Guchen was overestimating himself. With Yi Guchen's natural talent as a sage, it was only a matter of time before he became a Sword Sun. In everyone's opinion, even if he couldn't get the position of Sword Sun this time, he would definitely be able to do it next time. Even Jiang Yan, who disliked Yi Guchen very much, couldn't muster up the courage to go against Yi Guchen now. He could only despise him in his heart. How arrogant! Let's see how capable you are if you qualify for the 5 academies competition. Jiang Yan's face was ugly as he muttered in his heart. As for Ouyang Tianji, he was too ashamed to come to Sacred Cliff College. The person with the most complicated feelings at the scene was probably Ling Moyne. 3 months ago, Yiguchen was questioned by everyone just because he was a disciple of the Golden Emblem. Ling Moyin even directly said that Yiguchen was too selfish and arrogant. And now? Only 3 months had passed. Yiguchen was already a famous natural sage in the Sword Dynasty and a disciple of the Holy Emblem. Even if he wanted to become a sword son, no one would think that Yiguchen was arrogant. It only took Yiguchen 3 months to complete this transformation. Looking at Yiguchen, who was being praised by everyone, Ling Moyin didn't know why, but she felt uncomfortable in her heart. My brother, Ling Yamoshu, used to be so popular too. But after he failed in the 5 academies competition, no one remembered his sacrifice. Ling Moyin lowered her head, her face full of pain. Yiguchen's gaze fell on Ling Moyin. His eyes narrowed. After a complicated ceremony, Yiguchen was finally free. Young Dugu will open the 7-sword ancient tower for you in 3 days, Elder Ime said with a smile. Thank you, Elder. Yiguchen cupped his hands. The 7-sword ancient tower was divided into the inner tower and the outer tower. No Holy Emblem disciple had ever entered the inner tower. However, the disciples who entered the outer tower all made great progress without exception, especially in the area of Sword Dao. Yiguchen was also very curious. What kind of opportunity could he get in the 7-sword ancient tower? Most importantly, could he enter the inner tower? Other than the 7-sword ancient tower, the Holy Emblem disciples' resources were also very attractive. Yiguchen could enter the Spirit Gathering Pavilion, Sword Soul Cave, Spiritual Abode Elixir Pool, and other treasured places without restrictions. And he could even get a sacred herb for free. In other aspects, he also had far more resources than a Gold Emblem disciple. All right, none of you can disturb young Dugu's cultivation, Elder Ime said. Now that Yiguchen was Sacred Cliff College's treasure, they had to nurture him and provide him with a good environment. Next, Yiguchen could finally have some peace. He also went to get a sacred herb. Next, he just had to wait for the 7-sword ancient tower to open in 3 days. 1 day later, Mu Xingzu and the other Tianxian College disciples would also have to leave to prepare for the 5 academies tournament. Master, you still have to be careful. Hua Wuxiu definitely has a reason to be in the top 3 of the sword leaderboard, Mu Xingzu said with concern. Don't worry. Yiguchen smiled faintly. He would not underestimate any opponent, let alone a rank 7 prodigy like Hua Wuxiu. And after the 5 academies tournament, it would be the real battle for the sword master position. Before that, he could find out more about Hua Wuxiu and the others so that Yiguchen could be prepared. In the following time, Yiguchen was not in a hurry to cultivate. He walked around in circles and arrived at a desolate courtyard. This courtyard was overgrown with weeds, and very few people stepped foot in it. Just as he reached the entrance of the courtyard, he smelled a strong smell of alcohol. Yiguchen pushed open the door and saw a young man in black leaning against the side of a fake mountain. His right sleeve was empty, and his left hand was holding a jug of alcohol and drinking. It was Ling Yamoshu. Seeing Yiguchen's arrival, Ling Yamoshu fell silent for a moment, then took out another jug of alcohol from his origin ring and tossed it to Yiguchen. Yiguchen did not say anything. He sat beside Ling Yamoshu and drank silently. If you are here to mock me, you can leave after finishing this jug of alcohol. Ling Yamoshu smiled dejectedly. Why should I mock you? Yiguchen asked. I said before that you can't beat the Hua family. Now it seems that you have a chance to fight against Hua Wuxiu, Ling Yamoshu said. Oh, why me and not you? Yiguchen said in an inexplicable tone. Oh, are you really here to mock me? Ling Yamoshu shook his head and took a big gulp of alcohol. His cultivation was destroyed, his spiritual dwelling was broken, and his right arm that he used to practice swordsmanship was cut off. Ling Yamoshu was already a cripple. Yiguchen still said such words. If it was not mockery, what was it? Yiguchen also shook his head and smiled. Would you like to hear a story? What story? Ling Yamoshu asked. The story of a peerless swordsman who was born blind and whose spiritual dwelling was broken. Chapter 980. He was born blind, but he became a sword expert that shocked an entire dynasty. He and another sword expert had a sword duel. In the end, they were evenly matched, but he was ambushed by a despicable person. As a result, his divine dwelling was destroyed and he became a cripple. But he didn't despair at all. He went into seclusion in the sword pagoda for 10 years to comprehend the true essence of the sword. 10 years of accumulating a sword. Once it was unleashed, it shook the heavens and the earth. His sword was sharper than anyone else's. His will was more unyielding than anyone else's. In the end, he was reborn and comprehended the realm of being one with the heavens. A finger to the heavens, 10,000 swords salute. Yiguchen enunciated each and every word. His tone was calm, but he was narrating the story of an extraordinary sword cultivator. He was born blind, but he was unyielding. His divine dwelling was destroyed, but he had no regrets. No setback could defeat him. Even Ling Emoshu, who had been paralyzed for a long time, could feel that his blood, which had been silent for a long time, seemed to be showing signs of being ready to move. If possible, who would be willing to sink into oblivion? What you said is just a story after all, Ling Emoshu said, but he couldn't hide the slight tremor in his voice. Yiguchen looked deeply at Ling Emoshu and said, "What if I say that it's not a story? What if I say that this is the person beside me? This is true." Ling Emoshu's face froze. He was also a little surprised. Don't think that everyone is like you, willing to sink into the darkness. There are also people who still have a heart for the light in the darkness. Yiguchen got up and turned to leave. If even the story of Feng Manlu couldn't stimulate Ling Emoshu, Yiguchen wouldn't meddle in other people's business anymore. Clang! The wine pot in Ling Emoshu's left hand fell to the ground. He clenched his left hand into a fist and smashed it hard on the ground. Blood flowed from his fingers. If I had a choice, who would want to do this? I also want to pick up the sword again, but I can't do it. My right arm is crippled, my left hand is rusty, and my divine dwelling is broken. Watching my little sister turn from naivety to indifference, I feel worse than anyone else. Ling Emoshu's eyes were bloodshot as he roared madly. This was the first time he had let out such a roar after becoming a cripple. At this moment, Ling Moyin appeared at the entrance of the courtyard. She would always take the time to visit Ling Emoshu, but she just happened to witness this scene. "Duguwubai, what did you do to my brother?" He saw Ling Emoshu kneeling on the ground, his fists pounding into the ground. Meanwhile, Yiguchen stood with his back facing him, his hands clasped behind his back. Anyone would misunderstand and think that Yiguchen had done something overboard. Ling Moyin's eyes were red. She rushed in and scolded angrily, "Duwubai, I admit that I was blind. I'm not as good as you, but you can't insult my brother like this." Ling Moyin thought that Yiguchen must have said something bad to provoke and humiliate Ling Emoshu. "Little Een, this has nothing to do with Brother Dugu." Ling Emoshu gritted his teeth. He just hated himself. Ling Moyin didn't listen at all. She just stared at Yiguchen. Yiguchen didn't explain. He said indifferently, "If you've thought it through, come find me tomorrow." With that, Yiguchen left in a flash. The Ling siblings were left behind. "Big brother, are you okay?" Ling Moyin helped Ling Emoshu up. "I'm fine, little Een. I just want to be alone for a while." Ling Emoshu broke free from Ling Moyin's arms and returned to his room alone. The story of Feng Manlu had indeed deeply provoked Ling Emoshu. Looking at Ling Emoshu's back, Ling Moyin clenched her fists tightly. "Dugubai, why? We're not as good as you, but why did you have to go so far?" No matter how strong Ling Moyin was, 2 lines of tears still fell from the corners of her eyes. She didn't have the strength to avenge Ling Emoshu. She also hated Yiguchen for treating her brother like this. A sense of powerlessness spread through Ling Moyin's heart. On the other side, Yiguchen returned to his cave abode. He had already done everything he could for Ling Emoshu. If Ling Emoshu was willing to continue falling, then no one could save him. Yiguchen didn't mind helping Ling Emoshu. However, he wouldn't lick his face and help others wholeheartedly. If he didn't want to improve himself, then who else could help him? Yiguchen sat cross-legged, adjusting his breathing and meditating. In less than a day, a figure appeared outside the cave abode, half kneeling on the ground. Yi Guchen slowly walked out, looking at the half-kneeling Ling Emoshu with a calm expression. Have you thought it through? Yi Guchen asked calmly. I want to become stronger. Is there any way for me to become stronger? Ling Emoshu's eyes were bloodshot, and his tone was resolute and decisive. He wasn't willing to carry the title of a cripple. He wasn't willing to continue falling. Okay, but if you want to become stronger again, you'll have to work harder than ordinary people, Yi Guchen said. It doesn't matter. No matter what method it is, as long as it can make me stronger, I'll accept it. Ling Emoshu gritted his teeth. You should know that although the divine dwelling has been broken, it's not necessarily not a form of destruction. If you can transform it into a flawless divine dwelling, then your strength will be stronger than before, Yi Guchen said. A flawless divine dwelling. Ling Emoshu's eyes lit up, but immediately dimmed. He smiled bitterly and said, It's not that I don't want to be destroyed, but it's extremely difficult to condense a flawless divine dwelling. The quality of a divine dwelling was divided into flawed, flawless, leakless, and almost extinct. Most divine dwelling experts had flawed divine dwellings. Only a very small number of heaven's prides had the ability to transform into a flawless divine dwelling. As for leakless, only supreme heaven's prides like Di Haoyan could succeed. Ling Emoshu was once ranked 10th on the sword leaderboard and a disciple of the Holy Emblem, which meant that his talent and strength were definitely not weak. But to transform into a flawless divine dwelling was indeed a bit of a stretch. As long as you want to, there's nothing impossible in this world. Yi Guchen flipped his hand, took out a jade bottle, and handed it to Ling Emoshu. Ling Emoshu opened it and saw a golden pill lying inside, exuding a strange fluctuation. This is... Ling Emoshu said bitterly. A nirvana pill, Yi Guchen said. Yi Guchen had obtained 10 nirvana pills in the tomb of the ancient Chaos Wasteland. He had given one to Su Jiqing, so there were 9 left. The effect of the nirvana pill was to transform the physical body, sea of consciousness, divine dwelling, and so on. Of course, it didn't mean that the next nirvana pill would transform into a flawless divine dwelling. It only meant that the possibility would increase. A pill that could directly transform a person into a flawless divine dwelling, regardless of whether it existed or not, was definitely a rare and priceless treasure. This is too precious. Ling Emoshu's hands trembled slightly. The nirvana pill was too precious. Even if it only increased the possibility, it was precious enough. If word got out, a large number of divine dwelling heaven's prides would be extremely jealous. Ling Emoshu didn't expect Yi Guchen to give him such a precious pill. Yi Guchen smiled faintly. Take it, but don't consume it immediately. It might be more effective if you consume it after cultivating for a while. Ling Emoshu's eyes were bloodshot. He suddenly kowtowed 3 times to Yi Guchen and growled, No matter what happens in the end, I will never forget this kindness. Chapter 981. Get up, we still have to practice swordsmanship. Yi Guchen helped Ling Emoshu up. Practice swordsmanship. Ling Emoshu clenched his left hand. He was not left-handed, and his right hand was the most agile. However, it had been broken by Hua Wuxiu. It was extremely difficult to practice swordsmanship again with his left hand. Without 8 to 10 years, he would not even be able to enter the door. If he delayed for such a long time, Ling Emoshu would have been left far behind by his peers. This was also the reason why Ling Emoshu had been dispirited previously. It was because he could not see any hope. Left-handed swordsmanship is both difficult and easy. Who knows, you might become a left-handed swordsman in the future. Yi Guchen said with a faint smile. Brother Dugu, you must be joking. How is that possible? Ling Emoshu shook his head slightly. Although he was not old, he was not young either. It was almost impossible for him to become a left-handed swordsman in less than a few decades. I said before that there is nothing impossible in this world. Look. Yi Guchen smiled faintly and took out the 9-dragon thunder prison and another mystical pattern divine weapon. Ling Emoshu looked at this scene and was slightly puzzled. Since the beginning of the Sword Dynasty, Yi Guchen had never displayed the ability to use 2 swords. Therefore, no one knew that Yi Guchen could wield a sword with both hands. Moreover, the dexterity and proficiency of his left hand were not inferior to his right hand. Yi Guchen held the swords with both hands and started to fight with each other. As the swords collided, sparks flew continuously. The sword shadows caused Ling Emoshu's expression to freeze immediately. This is... Ling Emoshu took a deep breath. He was stunned. Yi Guchen's left-hand swords were not inferior to his right-hand swords at all. At this moment, Yi Guchen's two hands seemed to have independent thoughts as they each attacked and blocked. How is this possible? Ling Emoshu was extremely shocked. It was already extremely surprising that Yi Guchen could have such achievements at such a young age. What was even more unexpected was that Yi Guchen had such a high level of proficiency with the sword in his left hand. If he had not seen it with his own eyes, Ling Emoshu would have thought that Yi Guchen was possessed by some sword expert. Next, I will teach you a technique called the left and right interfighting technique. Although you have lost your right arm, you can still cultivate it with your left hand, Yi Guchen said. Then, he taught Ling Moshu all kinds of cultivation methods. Ling Moshu was suddenly enlightened as if he had been enlightened. It was as if he finally saw a utopia after many obstacles. He had never seen or heard of such a cultivation method before. Moreover, after a moment, after comprehending it. With this technique master, Yi to be to use to learn to learn to use to learn to master to swords in a short time. Learn to master even if he did not directly become a left-handed swordsman, at least his proficiency would not be weaker than that of his right-hand swordsman. Brother Dugu, this kindness is like giving me a new life. In the future, no matter who or what, as long as Brother Dugu needs me, I will repay you with my life. Ling Emoshu bowed deeply to Yi Guchen. Yi Guchen's kindness to him was too great. Oh, you don't have to do that. If nothing unexpected happens, you can also participate in the 5 Academies competition, Yi Guchen said with a smile. Ling Emoshu's face became serious, and immediately his eyes surged with fighting spirit. He was very curious. When he, a fallen genius, appeared in the 5 Academies competition again, how would Hua Wuxiu and the others look? Next, you should focus on diligent cultivation. When it's about time, take the Nirvana pill, Yi Guchen said. Thank you, Brother Dugu. After thanking him repeatedly, Ling Emoshu left. Looking at Ling Emoshu's back, Yi Guchen shook his head and smiled. Supporting the Divine Cliff Academy by myself is also very tiring. Let Brother Ling help share some of the burden. There was another reason why Yi Guchen helped Ling Emoshu, and that was to repay Sacred Cliff College. Yi Guchen would definitely not stay in Sacred Cliff College for a long time. After leaving him, Sacred Cliff College only had Xuanlian, a disciple of the Holy Emblem, to support it. If Ling Emoshu could rise again, Sacred Cliff College would not lose its reputation. On the other hand, Ling Emoshu began to practice his swordsmanship crazily after returning to his courtyard. Not long after, a black figure walked to the gate of the courtyard. It was Ling Moyin. She was afraid that her brother would be agitated by Yi Guchen's words and develop negative emotions, so she would come to visit him every few hours. This time, Ling Moyin's body froze at the gate of the courtyard. Her slender hand covered her red lips, and her beautiful eyes widened as she looked at the figure in the courtyard in disbelief. Ling Emoshu held a sword in his left hand, and he was in high spirits. His eyes flashed with unprecedented excitement. Ling Moyin was stunned. She could not believe what she was seeing was real. Ever since Ling Emoshu was crippled, he had never held a sword again. He spent his days drinking. Not to mention practicing swordsmanship. Ling Moyin even thought that she was hallucinating. Brother? Ling Moyin murmured. Little Een, you're here? Ling Emoshu smiled faintly at Ling Moyin. How long had it been since Ling Emoshu smiled? Big brother, how did you? Ling Moyin's mind was in a mess. At this moment, Ling Emoshu seemed to have returned to the past and become the brother she respected and loved. I'm sorry, little Een. Because of Big Brother's self-degradation, you have to bear so much pressure. After Brother Dugu's words of enlightenment, I've come to a complete realization. From now on, I will rise again. Ling Emoshu's eyes flashed with confidence. Duguwubai has enlightened you? What is going on? Ling Moyin was completely confused. Hadn't Yiguchen previously humiliated Ling Emoshu? Little Een, you've misunderstood Big Brother Dugu. Ling Emoshu told Ling Moyin everything that had happened. What? Duguwubai was trying to persuade you? He even gave you the holy nirvana pill and taught you cultivation techniques? Ling Moyin's mind was in a mess. She never would have thought that the person who would save Ling Emoshu in the end would be Yiguchen. She then thought back to when they were on their way to Mount St. Crossing. Yiguchen's seemingly harsh words had also provoked Ling Emoshu's numb heart. Now that she thought about it, everything made sense. So, I've misunderstood Duguwubai from the beginning. I was really blind not because I didn't see through his talent and strength, but because I didn't see through his character. Ling Moyin laughed at herself. From the beginning to the end, she was the one who had gauged the heart of a gentleman with her own yardstick. As for Yiguchen, he had never explained anything to her, nor had he targeted her. Thinking about it this way, Ling Moyin felt that she was completely stupid and unbearably harsh. Little Een, apologize to Big Brother Dugu. Ling Emoshu sighed. I know. I've been terribly wrong. Ling Moyin nodded and left in a daze. On the other side, Yiguchen was meditating in his cave abode, quietly waiting for the seven-sword ancient tower to come. Duguwubai. A woman's slightly nervous voice came from outside the cave abode. When he heard this voice, Yiguchen's eyes dimmed and he said calmly, Come in. Ling Moyin, who was wearing a long black dress, walked in. She was tall and slender, and her face was exquisite even though she wasn't extremely beautiful. But at this moment, her face was filled with complex emotions, nervousness, shame, and embarrassment. I'm sorry. Ling Moyin lowered her head. Ling Moyin was arrogant. But at this moment, she was sincerely apologizing from the bottom of her heart and begging for Yiguchen's forgiveness. Forget it. Yiguchen waved his hand. He didn't care about Ling Moyin's apology. Seeing Yiguchen's cold attitude, Ling Moyin bit her lip. Her delicate body suddenly twisted slightly like a mermaid. Her long black dress was removed, revealing her snow-white body that was like freshly peeled chestnuts. Chapter 982. The scene in front of him was indeed hard to control. Any man would find it hard to resist seeing the cold and indifferent Ling Moyin undress herself. However, Yiguchen frowned slightly and said, What do you mean by this? At this moment, Ling Moyin's snow-white cheeks couldn't help but blush. She suppressed her shyness and said, Duguwubai, Moyin admits that I did go overboard with you in the past. Ever since you came to Sacred Cliff College, I've been doubting you. You saved my life in the ancient Chaos Wasteland, but my opinion of you still hasn't changed. You put in so much effort to help Big Brother, and even took out a rare elixir like the Holy Nirvana pill, but I was still blind and misunderstood you. I apologize for my attitude towards you in the past, and I can't repay the kindness you've shown me and Big Brother. I can only repay you with my body. Ling Moyin finished speaking in a trembling voice. Yiguchen's expression was calm and he said, Put it on. This is the true insult to me. This. Ling Moyin lowered her head and was slightly embarrassed. In the end, she still put on her clothes, but she still said, No matter what, us siblings owe you. If you still haven't vented your anger, even if you want me to be your servant or concubine, it's fine. Alright, I don't mind. Yiguchen felt a headache coming on. Ling Moyin's personality was really stubborn. After receiving Yiguchen's forgiveness, Ling Moyin breathed a sigh of relief. A faint smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. Yiguchen was slightly taken aback. This was the first time he had seen Ling Moyin smile. You should smile more. Yiguchen sighed. Ling Moyin's cheeks flushed red when she heard this, and then she left in a panic. Looking at Ling Moyin's back as she left, Yiguchen was slightly taken aback, but he didn't care. After that, Yiguchen continued to meditate and recuperate. In the blink of an eye, a day had passed. It was finally the day of the Seven-Sword Ancient Pagoda's opening. The Seven-Sword Ancient Tower was the oldest place in Sacred Cliff College. Even before Sacred Cliff College, the Seven-Sword Ancient Tower had already existed. Only the disciples of the Holy Emblem had the right to enter the seven-sword ancient tower. With such a high threshold, most of the disciples were not fated with it. However, this did not hinder their enthusiasm for watching. The seven-sword ancient tower was located in the deepest core of the divine cliff grotto heaven. The entire sacred cliff college was also expanding outwards with the seven-sword ancient tower as the center. Under the guidance of Bei Xian Elder, Yiguchen finally arrived at the seven-sword ancient pagoda. He looked over and saw an antique ancient tower with an aura of history standing at the peak of the sea of clouds in the distance. The ancient tower looked extremely old, as if it would collapse at any moment. However, it seemed to be protected by a mysterious force that allowed it to stand for thousands of years. Is that the seven-sword ancient tower? Yiguchen's eyes lit up. For some reason, Yiguchen had a strange feeling when he saw the seven-sword ancient tower. This feeling was extremely strange and indescribable. At this moment, the seven-sword ancient tower was surrounded by sacred Cliff College disciples. Yiguchen was now the most popular person in Sacred Cliff College. If not for Grand Elder Imei's order to not disturb Yiguchen's cultivation, a group of people would have gathered outside Yiguchen's cave residence every day. Senior Dugu is here. TSK, the seven-sword ancient tower hasn't been opened for a long time. This is a rare event. Do you think Senior Dugu can enter the legendary inner tower? I think it'll be difficult. Even Senior Xuanlian couldn't enter the inner tower. Seeing Yiguchen's arrival, there was an uproar in the surroundings. Xuanlian, Kongkeng Han Lingxian, Yen Chok, Su Fan, Ling Moin and the others were all there. Especially Ling Moin. She seemed to have changed into a different person. Her face was no longer cold and harsh. Instead, it was very gentle and there was always a faint smile on her face. Senior Sister Ling has changed. She even greeted me today. Some of the surrounding disciples looked at Ling Moin with a strange expression. As for Ling Yimoshu, he had been cultivating in seclusion and didn't even go out of the courtyard. Therefore, in Sacred Cliff College, other than Yiguchen and Ling Moin, no one knew that Ling Yimoshu, who had been silent for a long time, had started to rise again like the sun. Seeing Yiguchen arrive, Ling Moin was a little uneasy. But she bit her lip and went up to him. Dugu Bai, you're here? Yes. Yiguchen smiled and nodded slightly. He wouldn't go so far as to argue with a girl. In fact, Yiguchen never cared that Ling Moin was against him. Did the sun rise from the west? All the Sacred Cliff College disciples were stunned. Doesn't Senior Sister Ling dislike Senior Brother Dugu the most? How can that be? Many people were stunned. Even Bei Xian Elder looked at Ling Moin strangely. Ling Moin's jade-like face was burning as she lowered her head. All right, Dugu, you have to make good use of the opportunity in the seven-sword ancient tower. Let's not talk about the inner tower for now. Even if you can only enter the outer tower, you might be able to obtain an unimaginable sword opportunity, Bei Xian Elder said with a smile. Yiguchen was now Sacred Cliff College's treasure. The more opportunities Yiguchen obtained, the greater his improvement, and the better it would be for Sacred Cliff College. Yes, thank you for your advice, Elder. Yiguchen nodded. In fact, Yiguchen's ambition was not limited to the outer tower. If possible, he also wanted to see what secrets were hidden in the inner tower. What did it have to do with the sky mountain that Ying Ning mentioned? Then, the 5 temple leaders arrived at the same time. This was because only the presence of all 5 hall masters could break the formation outside the seven-sword ancient tower. Rumble. Following a loud explosion, the sea of clouds outside the seven-sword ancient tower dissipated and the entire ancient tower was revealed to Yiguchen. Dugu Bai, enter, temple leader Luo Feng said. He no longer held any grudges against Yiguchen. Yiguchen nodded slightly, pushed open the door of the seven-sword ancient tower, and stepped inside. I wonder what kind of opportunity Brother Dugu will obtain. Xuanlian mumbled to himself. He had entered the seven-sword ancient tower before, so he naturally knew how many opportunities there were in the tower. The moment Yiguchen stepped into the seven-sword ancient tower, the entire door was sealed shut. Yiguchen looked around and saw 7 balls of light flying around in the seven-sword ancient tower. Every ball of light had a different color, but without exception, they all emitted extremely powerful fluctuations. Is the so-called opportunity of the sword in the 7 balls of light? Yi Guchen mumbled to himself. He suddenly stretched out his hand and grabbed a ball of light. However, the ball of light struggled to break free from Yi Guchen's grasp and flew away. Interesting. Yi Guchen smiled faintly. These balls of light definitely contained extremely profound cultivation methods and martial arts. Ordinary disciples might not have the opportunity to obtain them, and even if they did, it would be difficult for them to cultivate successfully. It was no wonder that only the disciples of the Holy Emblem were qualified to enter to inherit opportunities. Chapter 983. Before entering the 7-sword ancient pagoda, Xuanlian had told Yi Guchen some things. For example, the 7 balls of light outside the pagoda represented 7 opportunities. Anyone who entered the pagoda could only obtain one of the opportunities. Once you obtain the inheritance of one of the balls of light, you would not be able to obtain the inheritance of the other balls of light. If you were not careful and chose an opportunity that was not suitable for you, you would be in deep trouble. Therefore, choosing the most suitable opportunity was undoubtedly the most important. Even a disciple of the Holy Emblem could only enter the 7-sword ancient pagoda once. Therefore, Yi Guchen would definitely choose carefully and make good use of this opportunity. Since I can't take the balls of light, I'll let you choose me. Yi Guchen thought for a moment, then smiled faintly. Why did he have to choose for himself? Wasn't it better to leave the choice to the opportunities? Thinking of this, Yi Guchen made up his mind. His body shook violently. He performed the Azura sword principle. Then, he performed the 5 elements sword principle and the edgeless sword principle. The lightning sword essence that he had comprehended to the extreme also spread out. As these sword essences and sword Dao spread out, 3 of the 7 balls of light suddenly vibrated. Yi Guchen released the illuminated sword heart again, and 2 more balls of light shook. Yi Guchen performed the union of man and sword, and the last 2 balls of light also started to shake. In the end, the 7 balls of light surrounded Yi Guchen, as if they were fighting for Yi Guchen to inherit. Yi Guchen was stunned. This scene was beyond his expectations, and he did not know whether to laugh or cry. In the end, he still had to make a choice. Yi Guchen muttered to himself as he looked at the balls of light one by one. Just as Yi Guchen was about to make a choice, he suddenly looked at the walls of the pagoda from the corner of his eye. There were many ancient sword marks on the walls, and they looked messy and disorderly, as if they were just ordinary marks. However, Yi Guchen's gaze suddenly froze. How could an ancient and mysterious place like the 7-sword ancient pagoda have so many sword marks? Thinking up to this point, Yi Guchen could not help but slow down his movements. Instead, he began to carefully comprehend the sword marks on the walls. He had the sword demon talent, the enlightened sword heart, and the help of the enlightenment ancient tree. Yi Guchen's comprehension ability could be said to be a peerless monster. Before long, in Yi Guchen's eyes, the sword marks on the walls seemed to have transformed into a kind of cultivation method. A unique ripple spread throughout the 7-sword ancient tower. As the ripples spread out, the 7 balls of light of different colors suddenly collided and entangled together. Under Yi Guchen's slightly surprised gaze, it finally turned into a dazzling golden ball of light. A golden jade slip could be faintly seen floating within the ball of light. Is this the greatest opportunity? Even with Yi Guchen's calm personality, he was extremely surprised. He had thought that the opportunities in the 7-sword ancient tower were the inheritances in the 7 balls of light. Who would have thought that the 7 balls of light could merge into one to form an opportunity? Even a fool would know that the value of this opportunity was definitely incomparable to the previous 7 balls of light. Yi Guchen reached out and took the golden jade slip, then crushed it. Then, lines of ancient golden words appeared in the void. Yi Guchen looked at it and was immersed in it. Beside him, Su Qingyu's primordial spirit also appeared. He glanced at the ancient words with a look of surprise. To be able to make a heavenly tribulation saint look surprised, this cultivation method must be special. After a series of memories, The ancient golden character also dissipated in the void. Yiguchen only just came back to his senses, but his eyes were also filled with shock. The fortuitous encounter he had obtained was truly extraordinary. This is the cultivation method of the ultimate sword domain. Yiguchen took a deep breath and calmed himself down. The so-called ultimate sword domain was a special cultivation method. Everyone knew that the sword principle could transform into a sword principle domain. The sword principle domain was also one of the signature moves of a sword cultivator. The cultivation method of the ultimate sword domain was aimed at the sword principle domain. This cultivation method was to combine and stack the sword principle domain together to unleash a terrifying power. The power of the sword principle domain was extremely strong. Yiguchen could not imagine how strong the power would be if the sword principle domain was combined and stacked together. Ultimate sword realm. What a crazy way to cultivate. Even Su Qingyu was amazed by it. Even he had never heard of such a cultivation method. Although the power is strong, the threshold and difficulty of cultivation are also very high, Yiguchen said. He had already memorized the cultivation method of the ultimate sword domain, which was why he was so amazed. In order to begin cultivating ultimate sword domain, the most basic requirement was to possess 3 types of sword principles. Moreover, they had to be of the unparalleled sword principle level. Ordinary sword principles would not do. This condition was extremely difficult. Even Hua Wuxiu, Jian Jinghong and the others could not meet the requirement to have 3 unparalleled sword principles. Even the overlord forces could not find many geniuses who had 3 unparalleled sword principles. Other than Yiguchen, the other geniuses would not be able to cultivate it at all. However, the 3 supreme sword principles could only be used to cultivate the ultimate sword domain. The complete ultimate sword domain required the combination of at least 4 unparalleled sword principles. The more unparalleled sword principles were integrated, the more powerful the ultimate sword domain would be. Of course, it would be more difficult. As for the peak of the ultimate sword domain, the most powerful ultimate sword domain, it required the integration of creation-level sword principles. This cultivation method was definitely dozens of times more difficult than emperor-level martial arts. Although it is extremely difficult to cultivate the ultimate sword domain, if I can succeed, it will definitely become my trump card and killer move. Yiguchen's eyes flashed. If Yiguchen had the ultimate sword domain as his trump card, he would be able to compete in the 5 Academies tournament and the Battle of the Swordmaster. Even in the battlefield where geniuses gathered, Yiguchen would be able to dominate all the geniuses with the ultimate sword domain. I have gained a lot from entering the 7-sword ancient tower this time. However, where is the inner tower? After obtaining the ultimate sword domain, Yiguchen calmed down. Yiguchen calmed down. The entire 7-sword ancient tower did not have a 2nd or 3rd floor, nor did it have any compartments. Hence, he did not know where the inner tower was. Perhaps it did not even exist. Impossible. The inner tower must exist. Where is it? Yiguchen sat cross-legged on the ground and started to think. He suddenly saw that the entire floor of the tower seemed to have formed an array. The so-called inner tower may not refer to a space, but a state of being, Su Qingyu reminded him. A state? Yiguchen looked at the array on the ground and suddenly closed his eyes. The sea of consciousness in his mind spun. Waves of soul power spread out, trying to sink into the array on the ground. The array on the ground suddenly released a strong repulsive force. Yiguchen's sea of consciousness spun wildly. The terrifying soul power broke through the array's seal. Almost instantly, Yiguchen felt the world around him spinning. In an instant, the scenery around him twisted and changed into a strange place. Chapter 984. Yiguchen seemed to be in the depths of the void, and the scenery around him was constantly changing. Yiguchen squinted his eyes and looked carefully. Suddenly he saw a picture. It was a towering mountain in the depths of the void. It was unknown how tall it was, but it seemed to reach into the stars. Could that be? Yiguchen's eyes suddenly focused. Although he had never seen it before. However, Yiguchen had an intuition that something was wrong. It was a towering mountain that towered into the stars in the depths of the void. It was the base of Sky Mountain, one of the 3 hidden forces in the Nantian region. Senior Ing Ning said that there might be clues about Sky Mountain in the 7-sword ancient pagoda. Could this be it? Yi Guchen thought to himself as he continued to observe. At this moment, the scene changed again. From the towering mountain, endless sword cries rang out. The void exploded, as if an intense battle was taking place. 7 rays of light shot out from the depths of the mountain. One could vaguely see the figures in the light. Those 7 people are... Yi Guchen looked carefully. He suddenly understood why there were only 7 balls of light in the 7-sword ancient pagoda. They might represent some of the martial arts inheritance of the 7 figures. The ultimate sword domain that Yi Guchen obtained might be the core essence of the 7 people's inheritance. It might even be an ultimate technique from Sky Mountain. Yi Guchen also understood. No wonder even the knowledgeable Su Qingyu had never seen this kind of cultivation method. If it was from Sky Mountain, then it made sense. With Sky Mountain's mysterious status, it was not surprising that they had such a terrifying cultivation method as the ultimate sword domain. Yi Guchen continued to watch. Are the 7 of you going to betray the sword tribe of Sky Mountain and do something against the heavens? In the scene, a mighty voice came from Sky Mountain. The 9 zones have decayed and need to change the world. The 7 of us will go down the mountain and create a new world. One of the 7 figures said. The 7 of them went down the mountain. It was 7 swords down Sky Mountain. Then, the scene changed again. Among the 7 people, there were some sword principle experts. In the end, those sword principle experts worked together to create an alliance. It was the predecessor of the Sword Principle Alliance and the prototype of the Sword Dynasty. So that's what happened. Yi Guchen sighed. The next scene showed that the 7 swords went into the depths of the void, as if they were carrying out some plan. Besides the 7 swords, some descendants of the 7 swords also appeared. Then, the scene shattered and the surroundings returned to the void. Yi Guchen was shocked. He let out a long sigh of relief. He did not expect that he would be able to find such a secret in the 7-sword ancient pagoda. On the mysterious heavenly mountain, there lived a clan called the Sword Clan. The 7 down sky was also to the 7 swords down sky was to surprise. Even the establishment of the Sword Dao Alliance and the Sword Dynasty was indirectly related to the 7 swords. Could it be that Senior Ing Ning's lover from 1,000 years ago is the descendant of the 7 swords? It was not impossible. Yi Guchen thought about his background and his mysterious father. Is my father also from the Sword Clan of Sky Mountain? Or is he the descendant of the 7 swords? Yi Guchen's mind was full of thoughts. The more he learned, the more confused he became. Why did the 7 swords betray the Sword Clan of Sky Mountain? What did it mean that the 9 zones had decayed? What was the new world created by the next 7 swords? Yi Guchen had even more questions in his mind. After thinking for a while, Yi Guchen still couldn't figure it out. But at least he had a basic understanding of Sky Mountain. He was no longer clueless. The Sword Clan of Sky Mountain is on par with the Immortal Valley and is even stronger than the Overlords. I'm really curious, Yi Guchen thought to himself. He was also very curious about the Sword Clan of Sky Mountain, which was related to his background. Yi Guchen thought about the Heavenly Eye Emperor's words. His background was related to the 100 clans of the heavens. Was the Sword Clan of Sky Mountain one of the 100 clans of the heavens? What did the Heavenly Eye Emperor mean when he said they were a forbidden clan? It seems that I have to make a trip to Sky Mountain in the future to solve these mysteries, Yi Guchen thought to himself. But all of this was built on the premise of strength. Yi Guchen could not even reveal his identity now. He had to wait until the future to explore the secrets of the Sword Clan. It's about time, Yi Guchen said. Yi Guchen also found out the secrets recorded in the inner tower. At this moment, the void in front of Yi Guchen suddenly rippled like water. Then, a strange jade seal floated in the void. This is the Imperial Jade Seal? Yi Guchen was surprised. The Imperial Jade Seal was as black as ink, as if it was carved out of black jade. Yi Guchen took it and did not find anything special about it. He turned to take a look. At the bottom of the imperial jade seal, there was an image of 7 swords overlapping each other. Is this imperial jade seal related to the 7 swords? Yiguchen frowned and pondered. At this moment, the scene around Yiguchen suddenly distorted and shattered. Yiguchen's mind trembled. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself back inside the 7 Swords ancient pagoda. Yiguchen was still holding the black imperial jade seal in his hand. Yiguchen felt that the black imperial jade seal definitely had a big secret. After keeping the black imperial jade seal in his origin ring, Yiguchen stood up. Yiguchen had gained a lot from this trip to the 7 Sword ancient tower. The ultimate sword domain was definitely comparable to the 10,000 God tribulation and a powerful trump card of the Eye of the Void. In addition, Yiguchen also learned about Sky Mountain. He also obtained a mysterious imperial jade seal. It was a fruitful trip. It was different from when he entered the 7 Sword ancient tower and obtained a single inheritance of the 7 swords. The ultimate sword domain that Yiguchen obtained was definitely more valuable than a single inheritance. Yiguchen was satisfied and stepped out of the 7 Sword ancient tower. As soon as Yiguchen opened the door, he felt countless gazes on him. The gazes of the Divine Cliff Academy's disciples were glued to Yiguchen. Bei Xian Elder and the 5 Temple Masters stared at Yiguchen. If Yiguchen could gain something and increase his strength, it would be a good thing for Sacred Cliff College. Dugu, how did it go? Bei Xian Elder asked eagerly. You can say that I gained something. Yiguchen nodded with a smile. Seeing Yiguchen's expression, Bei Xian Elder and the 5 Temple Masters heaved a sigh of relief. If he could gain something, it meant that the trip was worth it. I told you, there's no doubt about it. Senior Dugu is so talented, how could he not get an opportunity? That's right. Even if he didn't enter the inner tower, the opportunity in the outer tower is precious enough. The surrounding disciples were all laughing. They were also proud that Yiguchen could increase his strength and bring glory to the college. Hearing the voices around him, Yiguchen smiled faintly. He didn't tell them that he entered the inner tower. The secret of the Sky Mountain Sword tribe was not a big deal, but the black imperial jade seal could not be revealed. Therefore, Yiguchen didn't explain anything and let everyone misunderstand. He was not a person who was greedy for vanity. Dugu, you have to prepare for the 5 Academies competition and the battle for the Sword Master title, Bei Xian Elder warned. Yiguchen narrowed his eyes and nodded with a smile. The 5 Academies competition? Huh? I haven't fought with my peers for a long time. Yiguchen muttered to himself. Chapter 985. There was no doubt that Yiguchen was a battle maniac. Whether it was Xia Yubing, Xian Hao, Gu Xiaoyang, or even Di Haotian, Yiguchen could be said to have fought his way to where he was now. Which battle wasn't soul-stirring and blood-boiling? And in the Sword Dynasty, Yiguchen hadn't really fought to his heart's content with his peers. I hope that Hua Wuxiu, the 7th grade prodigy, won't disappoint me, Yiguchen said to himself with a faint smile. After the incident at the 7 Sword ancient tower, Yiguchen resumed his quiet cultivation. This was because Yiguchen was a disciple of the Holy Emblem and a natural-born sage. He could also cultivate in the Spirit Gathering Pavilion and the Sword Soul Cave without any restrictions. This day, in the Sword Soul Cave, Yiguchen slowly opened his eyes and frowned slightly. It's still difficult to find a trace of opportunity for the Lightning Sword intent, and the same goes for the All-Creation Sword intent. During this period, Yiguchen had been comprehending the sword principle. Ever since the baptism of the heavenly tribulation on Mount St. Crossing, Yiguchen's lightning sword intent had been perfected and was only a step away from transforming into a sword principle. If he could successfully transform into the lightning sword principle, Yiguchen would not only be able to display the sword territory exclusive to the lightning sword principle, but he would also completely fulfill the requirements for cultivating the ultimate sword domain. It could be said that this step was very important. However, Yiguchen still couldn't find this thin bottleneck. After all, it's a peerless sword principle. It's not that simple. Yiguchen shook his head and smiled. No matter how talented he was, what he comprehended was a peerless sword principle, and it couldn't be smooth sailing. If even the lightning sword intent was like this, Needless to say, the creation sword intent of all creation wouldn't progress quickly either. As for the ultimate sword domain, he hadn't even started cultivating it. Cultivating in the sword soul cave isn't of much help to me. It's time to make a trip to the sword tomb, Yiguchen said to himself. In the 5 academies competition and the battle for the position of sword master, the stronger Yiguchen was, the better. With that thought in mind, Yiguchen left the sword soul cave. As soon as he came out of the cave, he saw a beautiful black figure standing at the entrance. It was Ling Moyne. Seeing Yiguchen come out, Ling Moyne immediately went forward and handed him a vital ring. She said, Bei Xian Elder was worried that you might not have enough cultivation resources, so he asked me to bring you some more. When Yiguchen heard this, he smiled faintly and said, That's enough. You can distribute these resources among yourselves. Ever since Yiguchen became a natural saint, Sacred Cliff College spared no effort in nurturing him. Other than those extremely rare sacred medicines and other resources, Yiguchen could take whatever he wanted. However, Yiguchen had enough resources now. Moreover, his current cultivation was not something that could be achieved by accumulating resources alone. Therefore, he declined politely. Ling Moyne did not hesitate and took it back. Seeing Ling Moyne hesitating to speak, Yiguchen said faintly, Is there anything else? Ling Moyne seemed to have thought of something, and a wisp of anger appeared in her beautiful eyes. She said, Recently, there have been some bad rumors in the outside world. Oh, what rumors? Yiguchen tilted his head slightly. They said that your title as a natural saint is just a false reputation and a silver spearhead. It's too much. Ling Moyne could not help but scold him coldly. Oh, it should be the Hua family and other fake sacred families and Tensei College who are working together to promote it, but it doesn't matter. Yiguchen smiled and shook his head. Yiguchen did not care about false reputation at all, so naturally, he did not care about the slander of the Hua family. But what they said is too unpleasant. They said that in the 5 academies competition, you will be defeated by Hua Wuxiu. The more Ling Moyne thought about it, the angrier she became. I didn't expect that there would be a day when you would stand up for me. Yiguchen sighed and laughed. Ling Moyne immediately stopped talking, and a layer of bright red immediately appeared on her white jade face. She remembered her attitude at the beginning, and compared with now, it was indeed a world of difference. Well, I want to go to the sword tomb. Is that okay? Yiguchen asked. Well, the sword tomb is open all year round, and any swordsman can enter. The first time you enter, you will gain the most. You should indeed go, but there is a place in the sword tomb that you must not set foot in, Ling Moyne said. What place? Yiguchen raised his eyebrows. The solitary cloud sword sage's retreat. Ling Moyne said in a solemn tone. The solitary cloud sword sage. Lung Qianhen? Yiguchen was surprised. Yiguchen was indeed familiar with the solitary cloud sword sage. Back in the infinite wilderness plain, among the helpers invited by Mo Tianfeng, the strongest was the solitary cloud sword sage Lung Qianhen, who was a fake sage expert. That's right. Although Sword Saint Gu Yun was powerful, he was cold and arrogant and always acted alone. Back then, even the Alliance Master was unable to pull Sword Saint Gu Yun into the Sword Alliance. However, he did promise that Sword Saint Gu Yun could cultivate freely in the Sword Tomb. That Sword Saint Gu Yun also created a place of seclusion in the Sword Tomb. If anyone were to step into that place, although they would not be killed directly, they would be seriously injured and thrown out. Therefore, that place must not be set foot in, Ling Moyne said in a serious tone. Obviously, many people must have been at a disadvantage. They had mistakenly stepped into Lung Qianhen's retreat and were directly thrown out with serious injuries. Yiguchen's eyes flickered when he heard that. Lung Qianhen's character could be seen from the time he was in the Tianhuang Plains. In the face of the overlord forces such as the Starry Sword Pavilion, the other 2 helpers, the Master of the Red Cloud House and Huangfu Dingtao, were a little scared. Only Lung Qianhen did not move and did not show the slightest fear. Yiguchen was not 100% sure about Lung Qianhen's character. But at least Lung Qianhen was clear about kindness and hatred. He would repay kindness and never owed others. Although Sacred Cliff College is protecting me now, compared to the Hua family and other forces, I'm still inferior. If I can ask Leng Qianhen for help. Yi Guchen thought to himself. Sacred Cliff College was not weak, but it was still inferior to the 5 fake saint families. If he could get Leng Qianhen's help, it would undoubtedly be a good layer of protection. However, Leng Qianhen was arrogant and unapproachable. Even the proud divine state had tried to rope him in, but failed. Mo Tianfeng was able to persuade him because he had helped Leng Qianhen forge the Lonely Frost Sword. Yi Guchen knew that it was almost impossible for him to rope in Leng Qianhen. However, Yi Guchen was not discouraged and kept this matter in mind. Just as Yi Guchen was about to leave, Ling Moyin stopped him. By the way, there's another piece of news recently. Maybe you should know about it. Do you remember the map fragment we got in the ancient Chaos Wasteland? I heard that it's related to the legendary ancient ruins Holy Dynasty. The Sword Dynasty has sent people to communicate with the War God Dynasty and other forces. They might be able to find the location of the ancient ruins Holy Dynasty's treasure. Rumor has it that there might be a fruit of the Holy Path in the ancient ruins Holy Dynasty's treasure, Ling Moyin said. Fruit of the Holy Path? Yi Guchen raised his eyebrows slightly. Su Qingyu's voice rang in his mind. The so-called fruit of the Holy Path is the fruit of laws left behind by a saint. To some extent, it's the same as the enlightenment of the Holy Path law. I see. I didn't expect there to be such a thing in the ancient ruins Holy Dynasty's treasure. Yi Guchen sighed inwardly. There was no doubt that the fruit of the Holy Path was precious, especially for a fake saint expert. Wait. Fruit of the Holy Path. Leng Qianhen. Yi Guchen's eyes lit up. Chapter 986. There was no doubt that the Saint Tao fruit was extremely attractive to false saint experts. It would be a good choice if he could use this opportunity to win over Leng Qianhen. Moreover, given Leng Qianhen's character, if Yi Guchen really helped Leng Qianhen break through to become a saint, Leng Qianhen would definitely return the favor. However, this was just Yi Guchen's imagination. Firstly, it was still unknown whether there was a Saint Tao fruit in the ruined Sky Holy Dynasty's legacy. Secondly, even if the legacy was opened, if there was no formation to block experts, it would be almost impossible for Yi Guchen to seize the Saint Tao fruit. However, no matter what, Yi Guchen would not let go of a chance as long as there was a chance. After that, Yi Guchen made some preparations and quietly left Sacred Cliff College, heading to the Sword Catacomb. When he left the college, Yi Guchen did not alert anyone and left alone. He even put on a cloak and a hood to cover his face. It was not that Yi Guchen deliberately wanted to hide. It was just that he really did not want to be surrounded like a rare animal. In particular, the disturbance at Mount St. Crossing had not yet subsided. If Yi Guchen went to the Sword Catacomb openly, he would probably attract a large group of people to follow him. Moreover, Yi Guchen also wanted to use the sword principle that he had comprehended in the Sword Catacomb as a trump card. If he exposed himself in advance, it would alert Hua Wuxiu and other opponents, which would not do Yi Guchen any good. Therefore, after careful consideration, Yi Guchen chose to hide his identity and leave alone. The Sword Catacomb was located at the Heavenly Sword Mountain, one of the 360 mountain ranges of the Sword Dynasty. It was not particularly far from the Divine Cliff Mountain range. After riding a flying beast, Yi Guchen spent 3 days and finally arrived at the Heavenly Sword Mountain range. After another half a day, Yi Guchen sat cross-legged on the flying beast and looked into the distance. A city came into view. We've arrived at Sword Leaning City, Yi Guchen murmured. As one of the 4 great secret realms of the Sword Dynasty, the Sword Catacomb's popularity went without saying. As time passed, a bustling city was formed beside the Sword Tomb. It was Sword Leaning City. Yi Guchen planned to rest in Sword Leaning City for a day and adjust his condition. At the same time, he would also inquire about the details of the Sword Tomb. 10 li away from the Sword Leaning City, Yi Guchen descended from his flying beast and entered the city. It was just as Yi Guchen had expected. Even in Sword Leaning City, the many sword practitioners who came and went were mostly talking about him passing the 20th level of Mount St. Crossing. One could imagine what would happen if even one person knew Yi Guqin's identity. In less than half an hour, the entire sword-leaning city would know that Yi Guqin had come to the sword tomb. When the time came for Yi Guqin to challenge the sword catacomb, he would also attract countless spectators. It would be impossible for him to use the lightning sword principle as a hidden trump card. Then, Yi Guqin found a restaurant. As he drank, he inquired about the sword catacomb. TSK, as expected of a sword sun prodigy. That Jian Shisan actually went 70,000 feet into the sword catacomb and is still cultivating there. Some exclamations came from the table beside him. Yi Guqin's eyes narrowed. He had heard of Jian Shisan's name from Kenpo before. Although Jian Shisan was ranked last among the 13 sword sons, he was very powerful. He was the strongest among the sword sons in the independent cultivator camp. Kenpo had once said that if Yi Guqin had not appeared, then the one who had the highest chance of becoming Jiankue would have been Jian Shisan. Yi Guqin did not expect that Jian Shisan was actually cultivating in the sword catacomb. There's no need to talk about sword 13. That Yin family's Inju is really amazing. He's already 6,000 meters in. Suki Miyazaki from Tianxian College also broke through 50,000 feet. I think she can break through 60,000 feet this time. Unfortunately, they can't break Jian Jinghong's record of 80,000 feet. Jian Jinghong has the creation-level sword intent. He is like a fish in water in the sword catacomb. He has an advantage over the other prodigies, Yi Guqin thought to himself as he listened to the information around him. The entire sword catacomb was 10,000 feet deep. The deeper one went, the thicker the sword-based Taoist rhymes. At the same time, the pressure of the sword qi would also be stronger. Apart from the results of the supremacies and the pseudo-sanctuary powerhouses. Among the younger generation, Jian Jinghong was the one who set the record. Because he had the creation-level sword intent, he had a great advantage in the sword catacomb and set the record of 80,000 feet. So far, no one among the younger generation had been able to break it. Hey, if Duguubai came to the sword catacomb, how deep do you think he could go? It's hard to say. After all, Mount Saint Crossing is very different from the sword catacomb. I don't think so. After all, he is a natural-born saint with extraordinary talent. If he came to the sword catacomb, he might not be able to break Jian Jinghong's record, but he would at least be able to go 60,000 feet deep. The people around him began to chat. Seeing that the people around him were talking about him again, Yi Guqin smiled bitterly under the hood. At this moment, a cold female voice rang out. Duguubai is just a silver spearhead. Even if he came to the sword catacomb, he might not even be able to beat Brother Yinju, let alone break Jian Jinghong's record. Hearing this, the entire inn fell silent. Two figures, a man and a woman, slowly walked in. It was the woman who spoke. She was beautiful, but at this moment, she looked unhappy. Cousin is right. Duguubai is just a false name. When the 5 academies competition comes, his disguise will be exposed, the other man said lightly. It's Yin Lin and Yin Su. Looking at the man and woman, some people whispered. Yin Lin and Yin Su both came from the Yin family, one of the 5 pseudo-saint families. They were from the same family as Yin Wufeng. Yin Ju was the strongest genius of the Yin family, ranked 6th on the sword list. Recently, he had also set a record of 60,000 feet deep in the sword catacomb. Hearing these two people's words, the surrounding people were quiet and no one refuted. As a pseudo-saint family, the Yin family was still very famous in the sword dynasty. No one was willing to provoke the Yin family for no reason. Seeing that no one refuted, Yin Lin and Yin Su spoke one after another, criticizing Yi Guqin. Their words were extremely harsh. In the dark, Yi Guqin shook his head slightly. His position was destined to be on the opposite side of the 5 pseudo-saint families. It was normal for the Yin family to smear him like this. When the 5 academies competition came, all the smears and rumors would naturally fall apart. Yi Guqin did not stand up to refute. Just when he was about to leave, in a corner of the restaurant, a delicate shout suddenly rang out. Bullshit! As soon as these words were shouted out, Yin Lin and Yin Su stopped speaking, and then their gazes suddenly focused. Someone dared to refute their words? All the eyes in the inn were also fixed on that corner. A purple-clothed young girl with a pretty face was staring coldly at Yin Lin and Yin Su with a sullen expression. On her small and full chest, there was a silver badge. She is a silver emblem disciple of Sacred Cliff College. Many martial artists in the restaurant looked like they were waiting to watch a good show. Now, it was interesting. Chapter 987. As a loose cultivator faction, Sacred Cliff College's relationship with the pseudo-saint families was obvious. Upon seeing this, Yin Lin said coldly, "What's wrong, Zimo? Did I say something wrong?" The purple-clothed girl named Zimo sneered and said, "You're not just wrong. You're just spewing nonsense. Senior Dugu's reputation isn't something you can smear." Today, Yiguchin was the backbone and revered figure of all Sacred Cliff College's disciples. Although Zimo had been cultivating in the Sword Tomb recently and hadn't returned to the college, she hadn't seen Yiguchin with her own eyes. However, this didn't hinder her respect for Yiguchin. Naturally, Zimo couldn't stand Yin Lin and Yin Su slandering Yiguchin like this. Oh, that Dugubai's image disappeared when he was breaking through the last level. Who knows if he cheated or not? Moreover, Dugubai's highest battle record was against Ouyang Fengyun, Yin Su said coldly. That's right. Ouyang Fengyun is only 9th on the sword ranking. No one knows Dugubai's true battle strength. Maybe big brother Yin Ju can crush him, Yin Lin said with a sneer. You're gauging the heart of a gentleman with your own mean measure. If you have the guts, let your Yin family's Yin Ju cheat and see if he can break through the 20th level. Zimo retorted strongly. These words made Yin Lin and Yin Su feel stifled in their chests, their expressions unnatural. If Yiguchin's battle strength was unknown, some people would agree. However, if Yiguchin cheated, even the warriors present couldn't help but roll their eyes. If it was so easy to cheat on Mount St. Crossing, there would have been someone who could pass the 20th level long ago. So what? If you have the ability, get Dugubai to challenge the Sword Catacomb. Can he compare to big brother Yin Ju? Yin Lin changed the topic. I believe that if senior brother Dugu were to come, he would definitely surpass Yin Ju and even break Jian Jinghong's record. Zimo vowed. As soon as he said this, not to mention Yin Lin and Yin Su, even the surrounding warriors shook their heads slightly. If it was said that Yiguchin could reach a depth of 60,000 feet, then perhaps some people would agree. But to say that he could break Jian Jinghong's record was a bit ridiculous. The reason why Jian Jinghong was able to set a record for the younger generation was because he possessed a creation-level sword will. Without the sword will of creation, Jian Jinghong would not have been able to penetrate 80,000 feet. What a joke! Aren't you afraid that your bragging will be exposed? I'm afraid that even if Dugubai himself were here, he wouldn't dare to say such arrogant words. Yin Lin sneered. You're courting death. Zimo saw the playful ridicule on Yin Lin's face and couldn't help but be angry. She was also a girl with a rather fiery personality. She immediately drew her sword and stabbed at Yin Lin. Do you think I'm afraid of you? Yin Lin also scolded coldly and stabbed with her sword. The two girls instantly started fighting. Sword shadows flew everywhere and sparks flew. Zimo and Yin Lin were both at stage 9 of the Spirit Bridge of Heaven and Earth. But as time passed, Yin Lin was obviously at a disadvantage. Duckweed's sword technique. Zimo's sword momentum changed. She consecutively struck out dozens of times. The sword flowers were beautiful and the sword moves were erratic like duckweed in the water. Yin Lin's pressure increased greatly and she immediately retreated. And at this moment, Yin Su's eyes narrowed slightly and he suddenly attacked. He flipped his hand and stabbed at Zimo's waist. Yin Su couldn't directly kill a silver emblem disciple of Sacred Cliff College in public. He couldn't bear the consequences of that. But if it was just a serious injury, it wouldn't matter too much. Oh no! Zimo's pretty face changed. She didn't expect Yin Su to be so shameless. At the crucial moment, he ambushed her from all sides. Yin Su's timing was just right. It was the moment when Zimo's sword was unsheathed and unable to be withdrawn. Zimo couldn't block Insu's sudden attack at all. So shameless. Some of the surrounding warriors cursed in their hearts. But this was a conflict between Sacred Cliff College and the Een family. Ordinary warriors didn't want to get involved. Sister Zimo, it's good to suffer a little. Otherwise, you'll offend people with your words in the future. Een Lin saw the situation and a mocking smile appeared on her face. The cold blade was about to land on Zimo's waist. Zimo clenched her teeth slightly. However, in that split second, something happened. There was an ear-piercing sound of wind breaking, followed by a clang of collision. The sword in Insu's hand was actually blasted out of his hand, and he took a few steps back in succession. What's going on? This sudden scene was out of everyone's expectations. At the same time, Zimo's sword move also sent Een Lin flying. She coughed up blood at the corner of her mouth. Damn it. Een Lin's face was cold. She was extremely uncomfortable. Everyone looked over and saw a chopstick stuck into the wall on the other side. Hiss! Many warriors sucked in a breath of air. The thing that sent Insu's sword flying was actually a chopstick. And it was a wooden chopstick. Insu was also slightly stunned. No matter what, he was still a stage 9 expert. He shouldn't be so weak. In an instant, everyone in the restaurant looked at the source of the flying chopstick. They saw a hooded, cloaked person by the window on the other side. He was leisurely drinking wine. In one hand, he was twirling a chopstick. The person who attacked was Yi Guchen. I can't detect his aura. Insu and Een Lin both looked serious. If Yi Guchen wanted to hide his aura, they wouldn't be able to detect it. On the other side, Zimo looked at Yi Guchen in surprise. She didn't expect a stranger to help her. May I know your name? Insu frowned and asked. Nobody. Yi Guchen slightly lowered his voice. Good, we will remember today's matter. Insu looked deeply at Yi Guchen and turned to leave. Een Lin's face was a little ugly. Blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. She had suffered a lot under Zimo's hands. Wait. Een Lin looked bitterly at Zimo and Yi Guchen and also left. The whole restaurant was noisy again. But most people's eyes were still fixed on Yi Guchen. To be able to use a chopstick to defeat a stage 9 spirit bridge expert. Everyone knew that this cloaked person was not simple. Under the hood, Yi Guchen frowned slightly and got up to leave. At this time, Zimo blocked in front of Yi Guchen. My name is Zimo, a silver emblem disciple of Sacred Cliff College. Thank you for your help. Zimo stretched out her hand. She was very frank and generous. Yi Guchen shook her hand and didn't say his name. Zimo saw this and didn't ask. Instead, she said, Are you also going to the Sword Catacomb? I do want to take a look at the Sword Catacomb. Yi Guchen said lightly. That's good. Tomorrow, a few of us Sacred Cliff College disciples will go together. If you don't mind, you can go together. And in the Sword Catacomb, the pressure of the sword is slightly different on different paths. If you follow us, you can choose the path with less pressure, and it will be easier to go deeper. Zimo smiled lightly. She was repaying Yi Guchen for his help. There is such a difference? Yi Guchen hadn't heard of it. Yes, and there are some difficult to enter forbidden areas in the Sword Catacomb. We will also tell you. In short, if you follow us, I guarantee that you can go more than 3,000 feet into the Sword Catacomb. Zimo patted her chest and said confidently. The deeper one went into the Sword Catacomb, the better the effect of cultivation. Ordinary rogue cultivators could go no deeper than 2,000 feet. Zimo also mistakenly thought that Yi Guchen was a rogue cultivator. And 3,000 feet was already Zimo's best result. 3,000 feet? Yi Guchen smiled and didn't say anything. His goal was more than 3,000 feet. Chapter 988. After that, Zimo brought Yi Guchen to a manor in Sword-Leaning City. This manor was where the disciples of Sacred Cliff College stayed. As soon as Zimo entered the manor, a few figures came up to her. Little junior sister is here. Are you all right? I heard that you had a conflict with the Een family again? These people were all disciples of Sacred Cliff College. It was obvious that Zimo was very popular among them. I'm fine. I even taught that bitch Lin a lesson, Zimo said with a smile. She was in a good mood. Is that so? It's good that you're not injured. This is... The leader of the group, a man in green, looked at Yiguchin with some hesitation. That Su was extremely shameless. He wanted to sneak up on me. It was this gentleman who helped me, Zimo said. Oh, is that so? Thank you for helping Zimo. I'm Qin Lang, a Silver Emblem disciple of Sacred Cliff College. The man named Qin Lang cupped his hands. Yiguchin nodded slightly. Seeing that, Qin Lang frowned slightly. The person in front of him was so arrogant that he didn't even tell him his name. On the side, Zimo saw this and quickly tried to smooth things over. You don't know how powerful this young lord is. With just a wooden chopstick, he was able to repel Su's sword force. Zimo was enraptured when she said this. She was very interested in Yiguchin's cool moves. Qin Lang's eyes flashed with a strange light when he saw Zimo's beautiful eyes. Tomorrow, we will enter the sword catacomb again. Since this gentleman has helped me, I will naturally help you tomorrow. We will go at least 3,000 feet into the sword catacomb, Qin Lang said calmly as he hid the strange light in his eyes. However, there was a hint of arrogance in his words. Being able to penetrate 3,000 feet into the sword tomb was already a pretty good result. Oh, you can even help others enter the sword catacomb? Yiguchin asked. Heh. It seems like this is the first time you've come to the sword catacomb, so you're not clear about the situation. In fact, if there's a sword expert leading the way, it can reduce some of the sword pressure. However, according to the strength of those who enter, the pressure will also be different. Therefore, we can't follow the venerables or even the false saints. However, if there is a prodigy leading the way, we can achieve good results, Qin Lang explained. To put it simply, the older generation experts were unable to lead the younger generation disciples in. However, if a genius like Jian Jinghong took the lead, he would be able to help the other disciples to a great extent. Qin Lang knew that he was the most qualified person to lead everyone into the sword tomb. Previously, a small part of the reason why Zimo was able to penetrate 3,000 feet into the sword catacomb was because Qin Lang was leading the way. Yes, with senior brother Qin Lang leading the way, we can definitely help you to penetrate 3,000 feet into the sword catacomb tomorrow, Zimo also said to Yiguchin with a smile. Yiguchin nodded slightly and didn't say anything. He couldn't refuse their good intentions. Although Yiguchin didn't need it at all. Then, everyone began to adjust their breathing and prepare for entering the sword catacomb tomorrow. However, Zimo, the girl, circled around Yiguchin like a sparrow and asked Yiguchin curiously about the technique he used. Yiguchin was also a little speechless. On the other side, Qin Lang looked at this scene expressionlessly. Late at night, Yiguchin was adjusting his breathing alone in the wing room. A figure in green pushed the door and entered. It was Qin Lang. What's the matter? Yiguchin said indifferently. I'll get straight to the point. Junior apprentice Sister Zimo is my Dao companion. Regardless of whether this brother is helping me out of righteousness or has other motives, it's impossible for you two to be together. Junior Sister Zimo is a Silver Emblem disciple of Sacred Cliff College. It's only a matter of time before she becomes a Gold Emblem disciple in the future. You're just a rogue cultivator, so I hope you can recognize yourself. After the sword catacomb, please leave quietly. Qin Lang said indifferently. He restrained himself and didn't do anything else, nor did he say anything too harsh. He just instinctively showed his vigilance and resistance when he saw his sweetheart being attracted to another man. You worry too much. I don't have any thoughts, Yiguchin said indifferently. That's for the best. I'll help you enter the sword catacomb tomorrow, as long as you don't fall behind. Qin Lang's expression softened slightly, and he turned to leave. Yiguchin shook his head slightly and continued to adjust his breathing. If Qin Lang did anything excessive, Yiguchin wouldn't let him go. But fortunately, he restrained himself and didn't get into a physical fight. The night was quiet. The next morning, Yiguchin was still adjusting his breathing when a beautiful figure in purple pushed the door open and rushed in. Young master, let's go, Zimo said in high spirits. Every time they entered the sword catacomb, they would gain something and gain enlightenment. And because of the great pressure in the sword catacomb, except for those sword Dao prodigies, the rest couldn't stay in it for too long. That was why they frequently came in and out. Yiguchen nodded slightly and followed Zimo out. In the manor, the Sacred Cliff College team led by Qin Lang had already gathered. There were more than 20 people. Among them, Qin Lang's cultivation was the highest, not far from the divine dwelling stage. Zimo was second. "Let's go," Qin Lang said expressionlessly when he saw Zimo arrive with Yiguchen. The group left Sword Leaning City and headed to the Sword Catacomb. The Sword Catacomb was only 100 miles away from Sword Leaning City. Soon, Yiguchen saw one of the 4 great secret realms of the Sword Dynasty, the Sword Catacomb. The entire Sword Catacomb was a winding and undulating hill. From the outside to the inside, it was a total of 10,000 feet. At a glance, the entire hill was filled with countless ancient swords. Those ancient swords were either mottled with rust, glistening with a cold light, or stained with blood. Endless sword chi filled the Sword Catacomb. Even from a distance, one could feel the mysterious Dao aura spreading out. Of course, it was accompanied by the pressure of sword chi. At this moment, there were numerous figures at the edge of the Sword Catacomb. They were all sword cultivators preparing to enter the Sword Catacomb. It's the people from Sacred Cliff College. It seems that Qin Lang is leading the team again. Last time, they went 30,000 feet deep. I wonder if they will make a breakthrough today? Several warriors and sword cultivators revealed curious looks when they saw Qin Lang, Yiguchen, and the others arrive. As a frequent visitor of the Sword Catacomb, Qin Lang was no longer surprised by the people around him. Qin Lang also enjoyed the feeling of being the center of attention. However, it was at this moment that a cold female voice sounded, "Sister Zimo, enemies are bound to meet on a narrow road." Hearing this voice, the expressions of the Sacred Cliff College team changed. Zimo's almond-shaped eyes widened as she swept her gaze over. A group of people also arrived from another direction. One of them was a young man and a young woman. It was Yin Lin and Yin Su who had a grudge against each other in the restaurant. "It's the people from the Yin family." The surrounding people's gazes also converged on them. When the Yin family and Sacred Cliff College met, there would always be conflicts. At this moment, Yin Lin's beautiful eyes were coldly staring at Zimo. Obviously, she was still angry that Zimo had hurt her before. However, the eyes of the Sacred Cliff College team did not fall on Yin Lin and Yin Su. Their gazes uniformly fell on a man in a blood-red robe behind the Yin family. "Yin Ju." Qin Lang and Zimo's expressions turned ugly at this moment. Chapter 989. Each of the 5 pseudo-saint families had their own top prodigies. Although Yin Wufeng was not weak, he was not the strongest prodigy in the Yin family. The strongest prodigy in the Yin family was the man in the blood-red robe in front of them. He was the 6th on the sword list, Yin Ju. As the 6th on the sword list, Yin Ju's strength was unquestionable. He was also undoubtedly a prodigy of the divine dwelling stage. As soon as Yin Ju arrived, Qin Lang's expression changed. Although he was not weak, he obviously could not be compared to the divine dwelling stage prodigy and the 6th on the sword list. "Is that the 6th on the sword list?" Yiguchen glanced at Yin Ju from under his hood. His aura was vigorous, and he was indeed not weak. But he could not make Yiguchen feel the slightest bit of fear. Yin Ju did not say a word. He just glanced at the people of Sacred Cliff College and crossed his arms in front of his chest. However, this silence made Qin Lang and the others feel even more pressured, and they were a little breathless. "TSK, what's wrong? You don't have anything to say now that brother Yin Ju is here. Sister Zimo, aren't you very naughty and can't control your mouth? Why don't you say something?" Yin Lin smiled proudly with one hand on the corner of her mouth. "You." Zimo was so angry that her face turned red, and she gritted her teeth. However, the pressure brought about by Yin Ju was simply too great. "Sigh, it's a pity that Sacred Cliff College doesn't have a top prodigy. Yes, if the sword monk Xuanlian or Dugubai were here, the situation might be reversed." Some of the surrounding warriors shook their heads slightly when they saw this scene. Seeing Zimo being humiliated, Qin Lang was also very angry. But he also felt helpless. He was a silver emblem disciple, and his strength was nothing in front of Inju. If Brother Dugu was here, you wouldn't be so presumptuous, Zimo reprimanded. However, this sentence made Inju's cold eyes flash with a cold light. He took a step forward and snorted coldly. The pressure of a divine dwelling stage expert spread out. Cough. On Sacred Cliff College's side, Qin Lang, Zimo, and the others were forced to step back. However, there was only one person who stood in place, unmoving like a mountain. Inju's eyes narrowed slightly. He never thought that there would actually be someone in the Divine Cliff Academy's team that could withstand his pressure. It's him. In Lin and In Su's eyes met. Just now, Yiguchen was behind Qin Lang and the others, so In Lin and the others did not notice. Brother Inju, he's the one who attacked. In Lin pointed at Yiguchen with a sinister look in her eyes. If Yiguchen had not stopped him, Zimo would have been the one injured, not him. This person. Inju's eyes narrowed. He felt that he could not see through this cloaked person. Young master. Zimo's pretty face was also slightly shocked. She did not expect Yiguchen to be able to resist Inju's divine dwelling stage pressure. Qin Lang was also shocked. There was a look of surprise in his eyes. How dare you meddle in my In family's business? Inju's body was surrounded by true qi. Seeing Inju's actions, a large group of people gathered around were secretly shocked. Could it be that Inju was going to make a move against the God Cliff Academy? Sigh. Yiguchen secretly sighed. Although he did not want to expose his identity, he could not watch Sacred Cliff College be humiliated. Just when Yiguchen was about to attack, a clear and cold voice was heard. Stop it, Inju. The Sword Catacomb is a place for enlightenment, not a place for fighting. If you want to fight, wait until the 5 academies competition. In the distance, a group of beautiful women slowly walked over. The leader was a woman in a palace dress. She had a curvaceous figure and fair skin. Her light blonde hair added a sense of nobility to her. She was Suki Miyazaki from Tianxian College. Tianxian College is here. It seems that Inju can't do anything, some warriors said. Tianxian College was also on the side of independent cultivators because of Wu Hongyan. Suki Miyazaki was ranked 8th on the sword ranking. Although she was slightly weaker than Inju, there was not a big gap between them. If Suki Miyazaki intervened, Inju would not be able to deal with Sacred Cliff College. For Suki Miyazaki's sake, I'll let you go for now. Inju was very straightforward. Qin Lang, Zimo, and the others sighed in relief. Yiguchen did not care. It was best if he did not have to do anything. At this moment, Inju spoke again. Although I can let you go, this path belongs to the In family. Inju pointed to a path inside the Sword Catacomb. There were many paths from the outside to the inside of the Sword Catacomb. Some paths did have slightly weaker sword aura. Although it was not obvious, it could last longer if the sword aura was slightly weaker. That path belongs to Sacred Cliff College. Zimo clenched her fists so tightly that her knuckles turned white. That path had slightly weaker sword aura. The surroundings had always belonged to Sacred Cliff College. But now Inju's words directly wanted to take it for himself. Tisk, even if I give it to you, you can only go 3,000 feet deep. If we follow Brother Inju, we can go at least 4,000 feet deep. In Lin sneered. Qin Lang's face turned pale. In Lin's words were undoubtedly a humiliation to him, the leader of the team. If you are unhappy, you can attack. But even if Suki Miyazaki blocks me, I can still make you pay the price. Inju said coldly. On the other side, Suki Miyazaki frowned slightly but did not say anything. She had already helped Sacred Cliff College block Inju's attack. She had already done her best. Suki Miyazaki did not want to fight with Inju. It would affect her performance in the Sword Catacomb. Therefore, Sacred Cliff College had no choice but to suffer some losses. We choose another path. Qin Lang's chest rose and fell violently. His face was red from holding back his humiliation. Brother Qin Lang. The surrounding Divine Cliff College disciples were so angry that they felt as if their organs were burning. As for Zimo, her eyes were slightly red. As a girl, she could not bear such humiliation. But even if she could not bear it, she had to. Let's go in, Inju said calmly. He directly stepped onto the path of Sacred Cliff College. Looks like you won't even be able to go 2,000 feet deep today, In Lin said sarcastically. Zimo's shoulders trembled slightly when she heard that. If there are no top prodigies around, you'd better not clash with the In family, Suki Miyazaki said calmly. She also led the Tianxian College team and chose another path to enter. Let's go in too. Qin Lang exhaled deeply and waved his hand. However, his words did not elicit any response. The entire Divine Cliff College team withered like a frosted eggplant. Zimo's eyes were red. She looked directly at Qin Lang and said, Brother Qin Lang, Zimo would rather fight with the In family than suffer such humiliation. Sister Zimo, the situation is beyond our control. Qin Lang was also a little embarrassed. Obviously, his image in Zimo's heart had been greatly reduced. There was probably only one person in the entire Divine Cliff College team who was still calm. Let's choose a path to enter. Maybe we can surpass the In family. An indifferent voice rang out. It was Yi Guqin who had spoken. He did not care which path they chose. To him, any path was the same. There was no difference. Chapter 990. Hearing Yi Guqin's words, Qin Lang frowned. He was already in a difficult position, and Yi Guqin's words were like a stab to his heart. Setbacks aren't scary. What's scary is ignorance. You don't know how powerful Inju is, and you don't know how difficult it is to enter the sword catacomb. Qin Lang's face darkened. In his opinion, being able to bring Yi Guqin with him was already a great gift. However, Yi Guqin didn't know what was good for him and said something about surpassing the In family. Wasn't he mocking him? Even Zimo couldn't help but wipe the tears from the corners of her eyes, forcing a smile as she said, Many thanks for young lord's comforting words. This time it was indeed our loss. But next time, if senior brother Dugu and the others come, I will definitely make the In family pay the price. From her words, it was clear that Zimo also thought that Yi Guqin didn't understand the situation in the sword catacomb, which was why he said such ignorant words. Yi Guqin shook his head slightly and didn't say anything else. Let's go in. Qin Lang waved his hand and didn't say anything else. Young master, don't fall behind. Zimo also came back to her senses and tried to regain her composure. No matter what, the next step was to cultivate in the sword catacomb. I'm really curious. Which team will be able to enter the depths of the sword catacomb this time? Seeing so many teams set off, some of the sword cultivators around the sword catacomb also cast curious gazes. Of course, it's the In family's team. After all, Inju, who is ranked 6th on the sword leaderboard, is there. Suki Miyazaki's strength is also not weak. If Mu Xingzu hadn't risen to power, she might have been the trump card of the entire Tianxian College. Many sword cultivators were whispering to each other. As for the team from Sacred Cliff College, because they didn't have a prodigy leading them, and because they had lost their familiar path, it was one disaster after another. Everyone thought that Sacred Cliff College might not even be able to reach 3,000 feet. As soon as he stepped into the sword tomb, Yi Guqin could feel the pressure from the surroundings. He seemed to be able to hear the buzzing sound in his ears. Everyone focus. Don't let your emotions affect you. I'll lead the way. Qin Lang walked at the front of the group. Next were Zimo and the other disciples of the Divine Cliff. Yi Guqin brought up the rear. Although Qin Lang was targeting Yi Guqin because of his relationship with Zimo, Yi Guqin didn't really care about Yi Guqin. However, he still took care of the other students of Sacred Cliff College. At this moment, Qin Lang released his true qi, forming a transparent shield to protect the other disciples. The first 1,000 feet was not too difficult. Even some rogue cultivators could enter by themselves. Yi Guqin also walked safely at the back. He was not in a hurry. Instead, he was comprehending the Taoist rhymes of the sword tomb. There were countless ancient swords around him. The sword-based Taoist rhymes were almost catching up with the sword soul cave in the college. As expected of the sword tomb. It's only 1,000 feet, but the effect is almost comparable to the sword soul cave. Yiguchen's eyes were also filled with joy. The only chance to transform the lightning sword Dao was in the sword tomb. Moreover, the first time one entered was the most profound and the effect was the greatest. Yiguchen must not miss this opportunity. However, after going 1,000 feet, the speed of the Divine Cliff team slowed down significantly. Yiguchen could also feel that the pressure of the sword had almost doubled. Of course, the effect of the sword-based Taoist rhymes had also doubled. It had already surpassed the sword soul cave. Damn it. We're not familiar with this path. Qin Lang's face was slightly gloomy. They were most familiar with the path of Sacred Cliff College. They had walked it many times. However, this path was somewhat unfamiliar. The pressure of the sword aura was even stronger. On the other hand, under the lead of Inju, the In family quickly went deeper into the sword tomb. Suki Miyazaki's team also quickly went deeper into the sword tomb. TSK, I told you that Sacred Cliff College would not make it this time. Some of the warriors looked into the distance and could also see the movements of the other teams. After a full 2 hours, the team led by Qin Lang only went deeper into the sword tomb. Not long after they went deeper into the sword tomb, countless sword auras swept across the void in front of them. Oh no, we've encountered the sword aura tide. Damn it. Qin Lang saw the sword auras coming toward them and cursed angrily. Boom. The sword aura tide collided with Qin Lang's true energy shield and blasted them back. Zimo and the others hurriedly spread out their true energy to resist the sword aura tide. There were countless ancient swords in the sword tomb. When the sword aura accumulated for a long time, it would produce the sword aura tide. The sword aura tide would never appear on the path of Sacred Cliff College. Damn it. Some of the disciples cursed. The sword aura tide only happens occasionally. It won't last long. Let's get through it. Qin Lang shouted. Everyone channeled their true energy and advanced forward. Of course, it also consumed a lot of energy. Yiguchen was at the back, so he was not affected much. What a strange place. Yiguchen was still in the mood to observe the sword aura tide. After a quarter of an hour, everyone finally broke through the sword chi tide. However, the consumption of true energy and energy was also huge. No, it seems that we can't break through the sword tomb at the sword tomb. Qin Lang panted. They were now at the sword tomb, which was not as good as the sword tomb. However, it was still enough for them to cultivate. Regardless of whether they were willing or not, they could only stop and make do with their cultivation. In the other two places, Suki Miyazaki and the In family knew about the Divine Cliff team's progress. In Lin was very happy. She was gloating. Suki Miyazaki shook her head. She could not help the Divine Cliff team now. I'm sorry that we couldn't bring you to the sword tomb. Zimo apologized to Yiguchen. The sword tomb was a watershed. After the sword tomb, the sword-based Taoist rhyme would be twice as strong. The cultivation effect would also be better. Oh, are you willing to stop here? Yiguchen smiled faintly. What do you mean? The surrounding Sacred Cliff College disciples all looked at Yiguchen. Qin Lang also frowned and said, We have indeed failed this time. However, we have brought you so deep. Ordinary itinerant cultivators can't reach this far, right? Qin Lang felt that Yiguchen was a little greedy. If you don't mind, you can follow me deeper. Yiguchen did not explain anything. He continued to walk towards the depths of the sword tomb. Is he crazy? How far can he go without our protection? Qin Lang frowned. He was a little unhappy. Zimo's almond-shaped eyes flashed. Then she resolutely followed Yiguchen's footsteps. Junior Zimo. Qin Lang and the other disciples were a little stunned. Did Zmo actually believe that cloaked man who covered his head and tail? Follow them. Qin Lang's expression darkened as he followed the others. They all thought that their cultivation in the sword tomb was going to be a failure. However, after walking for a while, everyone in the Divine Cliff team was a little stunned. Why do I feel that the pressure of the sword qi has weakened a lot? Yeah, what's going on? Qin Lang and the others were all in disbelief. They did not even know how to react for a while. Zimo's beautiful eyes looked at the silent figure in front of them. The gazes of Qin Lang and the other disciples also landed on the figure who was calmly walking forward. Chapter 991. Could it be him? How could it be? Qin Lang shook his head. He did not believe it at all. He could not imagine how Yi Guqin could withstand the pressure of the sword qi in the sword tomb. That feeling, could it be? Sword heart illumination? Zimo's almond-shaped eyes sparkled as she stared at Yi Guqin's back. The rest of the people also felt a sword-based Taoist rhyme emanating from Yi Guqin's body. The Taoist rhyme seemed to be compatible with the entire sword tomb. It reduced the pressure of the sword qi around Yi Guqin. How is this possible? How can the sword tomb's Taoist rhyme be so easy to comprehend? Qin Lang was shocked. He knew how difficult it was to comprehend the sword tomb's Taoist rhyme. Even if one could comprehend one or two parts of it, it would be very helpful to go deeper into the sword tomb. At that moment, Yi Guqin had made use of sword heart illumination and sword demon's comprehension to comprehend some of the sword tomb's Taoist rhyme. Therefore, Yi Guqin was able to reduce most of the sword qi's pressure. The 20 or so Divine Cliff Academy disciples in the surroundings were also staring at Yi Guqin with a shocked expression as though they had seen a ghost. Master, you're really good at hiding your true colors. Zimo's eyes sparkled with unprecedented surprise. Although they had missed the familiar path, they had gained Yi Guqin. It could be said that what they lost at the swings, they gained at the swings. Maybe this time, we can also go deeper into the sword tomb. Zimo suddenly had confidence again. Qin Lang's face darkened. He did not expect Yi Guqin to be so capable. What made him most upset was that the entire team could only rely on Yi Guqin. How long can you last? Qin Lang snorted in his heart. He was not convinced. In his opinion, Yi Guqin could not last long with his comprehension. A quarter of an hour later, Yi Guqin led the Divine Cliff team deep into the sword tomb. Within this range, the sword aura's pressure increased explosively once again, and the clanging sounds of swords could be heard incessantly. Even Yi Guqin felt some pressure. As for the others, although Yi Guqin was sharing some of the pressure, there were still some disciples with weaker cultivations who were sweating profusely. Some of them couldn't hold on any longer. Let's cultivate here, the disciples said, their faces pale. They were already satisfied that they were able to reach a depth of 3,000 feet. Next, Yi Guqin continued to delve deeper. On the other side, the Yin family and the Tianxian College had already penetrated the 40,000 feet mark. What? Sacred Cliff College is still going deeper? After learning about the movements of Yi Guqin and the others, Yin Lin and Yin Su found it somewhat inconceivable. However, they were not too surprised. They only thought that the Divine Cliff team was lucky. As time passed, Yi Guqin finally reached the 40,000 feet mark. At this moment, even Qin Lang's eyes were filled with extreme shock and disbelief when he looked at Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin had led them deep into the 40,000 feet mark. Zimo was also a little dumbfounded. She had previously promised that she would lead Yi Guqin into the 30,000 feet mark. It turned out that he did not need any help at all. He could go deep into the 40,000 feet mark and even lead them along. At this moment, even Qin Lang could not hide the embarrassment on his face. When he recalled his arrogant attitude towards Yi Guqin, he felt like he had been slapped in the face. At this moment, all the surrounding Sacred Cliff College disciples completely understood. Regardless of the cloaked man's strength, at least in terms of swordsmanship, his talent was absolutely superb. Young master, why don't you join our Sacred Cliff College? After reaching the 40,000 feet mark, Zimo's pretty face was also filled with excitement. She could not help but ask Yi Guqin to join them. There's no need. Yi Guqin smiled faintly. He was originally a disciple of the Holy Emblem of Sacred Cliff College. There was no need for him to join them. However, Zimo clearly misunderstood. She thought that Yi Guqin refused to join them. A hint of disappointment appeared in her almond-shaped eyes, but it was quickly erased. What? They went deep into the 40,000 feet mark under that guy's lead? After hearing this news, Lin's face turned very ugly. Her heart was stifled. It seems that the cloaked man is indeed a little interesting. Ju's tone was indifferent. Although Yi Guchen's performance was beyond his expectations, the 40,000 feet mark was still within the acceptable range. In the following period of time, more and more team members stopped at the same place. This was because after the 40,000 feet mark, the pressure of the sword chi in the sword catacomb had reached an extremely terrifying level. It was not only Yi Guchen's team. On the Yin family's side, other than Ju, only Lin, Su, and a few other people were still going deep into the sword catacomb. On the Tianxian College's side, only Suki Miyazaki and a few other people were left. 60,000 feet. The Yin family's people have broken through 60,000 feet. Some people had been paying attention to the situation in the sword catacomb. When they saw that Ju and the others had broken through 60,000 feet, it caused an uproar among the warriors in the periphery. Suki Miyazaki has also broken through 50,000 feet. Now how is this possible? Is that the Sacred Cliff College team? When some warriors looked into the distance and saw Yi Guchen and the others, their faces were filled with astonishment. They did not expect that the Sacred Cliff College team could also break through 50,000 feet. Even if the Yin family did not occupy the path, the Divine Cliff College team should not have been able to go deep into the sword catacomb. Qin Lang did not have the ability to do so. It's that cloaked man. He's leading the way. Some sharp-eyed warriors could not help but shout. Everyone in the periphery of the sword catacomb began to pay attention to Yi Guchen. Inside the sword catacomb, Zimo, who had been following behind Yi Guchen, was in a daze. She felt as if she was in a dream. It's already 50,000 feet. Qin Lang also swallowed hard. Now, only the two of them were following behind Yi Guchen. The rest of the people had settled down to cultivate along the way. Who is this person? Qin Lang began to feel uneasy. Then, Yi Guchen finally reached the edge of 60,000 feet. This was also a big challenge. Looking around, within 60,000 feet of the sword catacomb, there were countless sword auras that formed a sword wall. It was difficult for ordinary people to break through. Even Suki Miyazaki was stuck at this level. This is as far as I can go. Zimo's face was wet with sweat. Her chest was heaving up and down. She was almost at her limit. Qin Lang could not hold on any longer. He could only stop there. Well, I'm going in. Yi Guchen's pace was obviously not going to stop there. Master, you have to be careful, Zimo said with concern. 60,000 feet. Even some of the geniuses on the sword catacomb may not be able to break through. Qin Lang also stared at Yi Guchen's back. It's not difficult. Yi Guchen smiled faintly. He took a step forward, and a five-colored sword light burst out, enveloping Yi Guchen's body. In an instant, the power of the five elements rotated endlessly. It was the Peerless Five Elements Sword Principle. That's the Peerless Sword Principle. Zimo and Qin Lang were shocked. The Peerless Sword Principle was not something that ordinary sword cultivators could possess. Yi Guchen did not display the Five Elements Sword Principle in the Sword Dynasty. Therefore, he did not have to worry about exposing his identity when he displayed it at this moment. Yi Guchen directly broke through the 60,000 feet barrier with the power of the Five Elements Sword Principle and stepped inside. Chapter 992. Watching Yi Guchen's figure step into the 60,000 feet mark, Qin Lang and Zimo's eyes were filled with shock. They were certain that Yi Guchen was comparable to the top 10 geniuses on the sword roll. I can't believe that I actually threatened such a person. Qin Lang felt cold sweat trickling down his back as he recalled the conversation he had with Yi Guchen and the hostility he had shown towards him. He was glad that Yi Guchen was not an extreme person. Otherwise, Qin Lang would be in deep trouble. Who exactly is this young master? Zimo muttered to herself. She could not hide the curiosity in her eyes. Qin Lang watched from the side. Although he was unwilling, there was nothing he could do. Yi Guchen's performance had completely shocked him. That person actually broke through to 6,000 feet? Gong Luyu's jade-like face revealed a look of surprise when she heard the news. She had not paid much attention to Yi Guchen before. Now that Yi Guchen had stood out, he was the center of attention. After entering the 60,000 feet mark, Yi Guchen also felt the pressure of the powerful sword aura. Even when Yi Guchen released the illuminated sword heart and resonated with the sword tomb's Taoist rhymes, it could not reduce the pressure. Furthermore, this was only 6,000 feet. However, the effort is equal to the gain. The Taoist rhymes here are indeed much stronger than before. Yi Guchen could also feel the strong Taoist rhymes. He could not wait to sit down and start comprehending the Taoist rhymes. However, Yi Guchen resisted because he was ambitious. 60,000 feet was definitely not his goal. On the other side, the Yin family team had also entered the 60,000 feet mark. However, after entering, it was very difficult to advance 1 foot. This should be the end of most of the top 10 geniuses on the sword roll. As for the 70,000 feet mark, only Jian Shisan was cultivating. However, Jian Shisan was the sword son. Even among the sword sons, he had a chance to compete for the position of Jian Kuei. Yin Ju was not as good as Jian Shisan. Therefore, it was very difficult for Yin Ju to walk the 60,000 feet mark. Yin Lin and Yin Su also stopped at 50,000 feet. However, they were not in a good mood. How is that possible? That kid is so powerful. He even brought that bitch Zimo into the 50,000 feet mark. Yin Lin was so angry that her chest heaved up and down. She was obviously unwilling to accept this. However, this should be his limit. No matter how strong he is, he can't compare to big brother Yin Ju. Yin Su vowed solemnly. On the other side, Suki Miyazaki finally broke through the 60,000 feet mark. However, after entering the 60,000 feet mark, she was obviously not strong enough. He's too strong. Who is that cloaked man? He's not weaker than Yin Ju and Suki Miyazaki? Outside the sword catacomb, many warriors were watching. Yin Ju and Suki Miyazaki were ranked 6th and 8th respectively on the sword roll. Neither of them were ordinary people. However, the cloaked man was able to keep pace with the two of them. Didn't that mean that he was also in the top 10 of the sword roll? Where did this person come from? Many warriors were incredulous. I'm curious. How far can this person go? I don't think he can go beyond 70,000 feet. It's too difficult to break through 70,000 feet. Many warriors shook their heads. As time passed, Yi Guchen also kept moving forward. 63,000 feet, 65,000 feet, 67,000 feet, Yin Ju and Suki Miyazaki could no longer hold on. Suki Miyazaki stopped at 64,000 feet. Yin Ju, on the other hand, stopped at 66,000 feet. They couldn't go any further and could only cultivate where they were. How is this possible? That person is still moving forward. Is he going to break through 70,000 feet? Suki Miyazaki was so surprised that she couldn't close her mouth when she heard the news. As for Yin Ju, his face was also extremely cold. Yin Lin and Yin Su were also angry, but at the same time, they couldn't help but feel afraid. Finally, Yi Guchen came to the edge of 70,000 feet. Looking around, the entire 70,000 feet range was filled with countless sword cheese surging in the void. It was a large tide of sword cheese. It was a large tide, far stronger than the one Qin Lang and the others had encountered before. Can that person pass? Outside the sword tomb, countless people tried their best to look into the distance, wanting to know the result. Along the way, I have some understanding of the sword-based Taoist rhyme here. With the help of sword principle, Yi Guchen's eyes flashed. Outside his body, 5-colored sword light surged. At the same time, Yi Guchen also used edgeless sword principle again. The surrounding space was slightly distorted, and the ground sank a little. With the protection of dual sword principles and his illuminated sword heart, Yi Guchen directly rushed into the 70,000 feet range. Countless ancient swords around him burst out with astonishing sword chi and swept toward Yi Guchen. Yi Guchen was unstoppable. He directly broke through the sword chi and went deeper. He broke through 70,000 feet. Outside the sword tomb, countless people exclaimed, "That was 70,000 feet." Even Jian Jinghong, who had the creation-level sword essence, could only go 80,000 feet. When Zimo, Qin Lang, Suki Miyazaki, Yin Ju, and the others heard the news, they could not help but feel shocked. Everyone was guessing who the cloaked person was. After rushing into the 70,000 feet range, the pressure of the sword had doubled. However, the sword-based Taoist rhyme also surprised Yiguchen. He could not imagine how strong the Taoist rhyme would be in the depths of the sword tomb. Yiguchen did not stop. 7,100 zhang, 7,300 zhang, 7,600 zhang. At a certain moment, Yiguchen suddenly stopped. He sensed a shocking sword essence and murderous aura flowing in front of him. The sword chi and murderous aura moved Yiguchen slightly. Yiguchen changed his direction slightly and rushed in the direction of the sword chi and murderous aura. Not long after, Yiguchen stopped. On a hill not far in front of him, there was a person sitting alone. That person was wearing a dusty gray robe and a child's toy like a ghost mask on his face. In front of him was a blood-red longsword inserted into the ground. That person was sitting cross-legged beside the blood-red longsword, as if he was comprehending something. Around him, a deathly stillness, extermination, and murderous sword intent surged. It's the lifeless sword principle. Yiguchen's eyes narrowed. That person had the peerless lifeless sword principle. As for his identity, Yiguchen naturally knew immediately. Jian Shisan, the strongest sword son of the itinerant cultivator camp. He was considered to be qualified to compete for the position of Jiankui. It seems that sword should be his sword, the quasi-heavenly tribulation divine weapon, the bloodbath sword, Yiguchen muttered to himself. Even among the younger generation of the sword dynasty, Jian Shisan was ranked at the top. Just as Yiguchen was sizing up Jian Shisan seemed to have sensed something as well. His face, which was wearing a ghost mask, slowly turned towards Yiguchen. At this very moment, Yiguchen's expression changed. Jian Shisan suddenly stood up, holding the bloodbath sword in his hand. He thrust his sword directly at Yiguchen, like a peerless god of death. Terrifying sword chi spread out. It was Jian Shisan's signature move, the fatal 13 swords. Chapter 993. Jian Shisan was one of the most famous sword sons of the Sword Dynasty. His signature move, the fatal 13 swords, was also well known. Jian Shisan's 13 swords. These 13 moves could be said to be the most powerful killing sword moves. Together with the lifeless sword Dao, which specialized in killing, it could be said to be a perfect match made in heaven. It was no wonder that Jian Shisan had such a reputation and status. Looking at the blood-red sword that pierced toward him in an instant, as well as the astonishing killing intent, Yiguchen instinctively flipped his hand and drew out a long sword. It was not the 9-dragon thunder prison, but another supreme-grade mystical rune weapon. The first sword. Jian Shisan opened his mouth, his voice slightly hoarse. His fatal 13 swords did not have a name, only the first sword to the 13th sword moves. But this did not hinder its power. The blood-red bloodbath sword pierced through the air, emitting a sharp whistle. It was like the god of death had passed through, stabbing toward Yiguchen's forehead. Although he did not know why Jian Shisan suddenly attacked, Yiguchen was not the least bit afraid. Clang! The sound of the swords colliding shook the eardrums, and even the surrounding sword chi was faintly blown away. A fierce sword chi came from the sword, and Yiguchen's arm shook, scattering it with his inner chi. Both of them retreated a few steps at the same time. So powerful. Yiguchen frowned slightly. Jian Shisan was indeed worthy of being called the Sword Son. His cultivation level was at least at the 3rd layer of the Divine Dwelling Realm, similar to Gu Xiaoyang of the Tianhuang Plains. But Yiguchen's current cultivation was not the same as before. Facing a 3rd layer of the Divine Dwelling Realm, he might not be able to completely resist, but at least he would not be too afraid. The second sword. Jian Shisan struck out a second time, and layers of blood-red sword shadows swept out, surrounding Yiguchen. Yiguchen's eyes flashed as he used wave-like subtle steps, his figure moving through the layers of sword shadows. He struck out with his sword at the same time. The sword light was as swift as a star, directly breaking apart Jian Shisan's second move. Again, the third sword, Jian Shisan's sword momentum changed again. The chaotic blood-red sword shadows overlapped and turned into a crimson sword light that pierced towards Yiguchen's chest. Yiguchen's figure shook as he unleashed his five-element sword domain. Five-colored sword light protected his body like a lotus flower. With a loud bang, the two attacks collided. Yiguchen retreated rapidly, his body trembling. After all, he hadn't displayed his ancient god body, nor had he used the sky-devouring secret skill to increase his cultivation. It was purely using the cultivation of the sixth stage of the spiritual bridge of heaven and earth to receive Jian Shisan's move. It could be said that with Jian Shisan's cultivation, almost no one below the divine dwelling stage among the younger generation of the Sword Dynasty could receive one of his moves. Even divine dwelling stage experts would be extremely wary of him. But Yiguchen had received 3 of his sword moves in a row, and he hadn't even used any trump cards. Just as Yiguchen was about to fight again, Jian Shisan stopped his sword momentum. Yiguchen also understood that Jian Shisan's sudden attack was more of a probe than a direct attack. Brother must be the famous Jian Shisan of the Sword Dynasty. It's an honor to meet you. Yiguchen withdrew his sword and cupped his hands in greeting. No matter what, Jian Shisan was the sword son of the unaffiliated cultivator camp, and also the companion of Kenpo and the others. Yiguchen's words were also somewhat polite. Moreover, Jian Shisan's strength was indeed worthy of his respect. You are not bad. Jian Shisan's voice was hoarse. He didn't say much. But if Kenpo, Jianshi and the others heard this, they would certainly be extremely shocked, because they had never heard words of praise from Sword 13's mouth. Jian Shisan had also never acknowledged anyone. Yiguchen was the first. I'm surprised to hear such words from the Sword Son, Yiguchen said with a faint smile. If you can continue, then go deeper. But there's no harm in telling you that if you continue on this path, you will reach the place where Sword Senkuyun is training in seclusion. Jian Shisan said, then sat back down on the hill and stabbed the bloodbath sword back into the ground. After Yiguchen heard this, he nodded slightly and didn't change his direction. Looking at Yiguchen's figure, Jian Shisan's eyes secretly flashed under the ghost mask. 6th level of the spiritual bridge of heaven and earth, could you be? Jian Shisan murmured in his heart. He broke through. The cloaked man has already surpassed Jian Shisan. Outside the sword catacomb, all the warriors and sword cultivators were extremely shocked. This news was like an explosion, shocking everyone's mind. Who is that person? How can he surpass Jian Shisan? Do you think he can break through the 80,000 feet range like Jian Jinghong? Is that possible? Countless exclamations and doubts rose and fell one after another. Inside the sword catacomb, Yin Ju, Yin Lin, Yin Su and the others who heard the news were completely speechless. Especially Yin Ju, he had now come to his senses. He knew that Yiguchen was at least an expert who could contend with him. Before this, he thought that Yiguchen and the others were afraid of him. Now that he thought about it, his arrogant attitude was no different from a clown. On the other side, Suki Miyazaki was also shocked and somewhat in disbelief. No. That person should not be able to break Jian Jinghong's 80,000 feet record. Suki Miyazaki murmured in her heart. She had long regarded Jian Jinghong as her target and opponent. In her opinion, in the Sword Dynasty, there were only a few people who could stand shoulder to shoulder with Jian Jinghong. How could this cloaked man, who had randomly appeared, compare to Jian Jinghong? Around the sword catacomb, the wind and clouds were surging. Everyone was curious to see how this cloaked man, who had mysteriously appeared, would end up. Finally, Yiguchen came to the intersection of 70,000 feet and 80,000 feet. As far as the eye could see, all the ancient swords within 80,000 feet were constantly trembling, and there was no time for them to stop at all. From time to time, there would be explosive sounds in the space, and the tide of sword energy would come wave after wave, endless. What a strong pressure. At this point, Iguchin's expression was also slightly solemn. Even with his cultivation, he felt a great deal of pressure. The pressure within 80,000 feet was twice as strong as that within 70,000 feet. Even Iguchin had to treat it with caution. However, in his eyes, there was anticipation. The greater the pressure and obstruction, the greater the harvest in the end. If that's the case, Iguchin's eyes flashed. From within his body, an extremely sharp sword concept spread out. Iguchin's entire person seemed to have turned into a sword. A peerless divine sword that could cut through everything and was always victorious. It was the unity of man and sword. Iguchin's footsteps swept and directly rushed into the 80,000 feet range. Heart of the sword, the unity of man and sword, and the 5 elements sword principle and edgeless sword principle. This allowed Iguchin to directly step into the 80,000 feet range. Boundless sword energy swept over, but Iguchin's figure was like a long sail breaking the waves, sweeping through all obstacles. At this moment, outside the sword catacomb, the atmosphere was completely boiling. He broke through, the cloaked man broke through the 80,000 feet range. Oh my God, doesn't that mean that he's already comparable to Jian Jinghong, who has the creation-level sword essence? Who is this person? Endless clamors sounded throughout the sword catacomb. Chapter 994. The Sword Vault was one of the 4 great mystic realms. It was not as good as Mount St. Crossing, which could directly test a person's talent. However, the further one went into the Sword Vault, the higher one's cultivation talent was. This was a well-known fact. Iguchin had stepped into the 80,000-foot range. That meant that Iguchin was not inferior to Jian Jinghong in terms of sword talent. Who was Jian Jinghong? He was Sword Sovereign I Ching's personal disciple, an 8th grade prodigy, a divine dwelling realm expert, and the second on the sword ranking. He also had the creation realm sword intent. Every one of his identities was important in the sword dynasty. And now, someone who was comparable to Jian Jinghong had suddenly appeared. It was no wonder that many martial artists around the sword vault had lost their composure. That young master really made it through? Zimo and Qin Lang had also received the news. Zimo's pretty face was full of surprise and surprise. She did not expect that the mysterious person who had helped her out would have such talent. Qin Lang's expression was also fluctuating. His heart was even more perturbed, and there was even a trace of regret. If such a person were to join Sacred Cliff College, he would definitely become a Gold Emblem disciple immediately. It's even possible for him to become a Holy Emblem disciple. I can't believe I targeted such a person before. Thinking of his attitude towards Iguchin, Qin Lang's face turned slightly pale. He was only a Silver Emblem disciple and could not be compared to a Gold Emblem disciple. Fortunately, Qin Lang had only provoked him verbally and did not make a move. Otherwise, Iguchin would not have let him go so easily. On the other side, Suki Miyazaki was completely stunned. She also did not expect Iguchin to step into the 80,000-foot range. First, it was Dugubai, and now it's this person. Suki Miyazaki bit her red lips. Both times, she had misjudged the person. At the same time, Suki Miyazaki felt a sense of defeat. In the past, when Jian Jinghong defeated her, she only treated Jian Jinghong as her goal. Now, she realized that whether it was the Dugubai from before or the cloaked man now, they were both geniuses who could stand shoulder to shoulder with Jian Jinghong. Of course, if Suki Miyazaki found out that both of them were Iguchin, she would be even more surprised. As for the Yin family, Yin Lin and Yin Su's faces were pale. Even though Yin Ju was unwilling, he had to admit that Iguchin was capable. Within 80,000 feet, Iguchin didn't stop. He continued onwards. Although this result was already very good. After all, among the younger generation, Jian Jinghong was the only one who relied on his creation-level sword intent to go 80,000 feet deep. But Iguchin was ambitious. He was unwilling to stop at 80,000 feet. The cloaked man wants to go deeper. Does he want to break Jian Jinghong's record? At this moment, Yiguchen had already gone very deep into the sword tomb. The people outside the sword tomb could only vaguely detect his movements. Hey, no, that seems to be the solitary cloud sword saint's place of seclusion. Some sharp-eyed people noticed the direction Yiguchen was going. That direction was the solitary cloud sword saint's place of seclusion. That place could be said to be one of the forbidden places in the sword tomb, because everyone knew that the solitary cloud sword saint Leng Qianhen was a recluse. Any genius who entered his place of seclusion would be swept out like garbage, although he wouldn't kill them directly. Everyone was the same. There were no exceptions. Tut, tut, what a pity. I wanted to see if the cloaked man could break Jian Jinghong's record. Yes, the solitary cloud sword saint's place of seclusion is at the edge of 90,000 feet. The cloaked man can't pass. Many warriors and sword cultivators shook their heads regretfully. That person is finally unable to move forward. Inju actually felt a sense of relief. On the other side, Suki Miyazaki also shook her head. She didn't think Yiguchen could pass through the forbidden place of seclusion. Sigh, damn it. If the Yin family hadn't taken the path of our academy, young master wouldn't have come across the solitary cloud sword saint's place of seclusion. Zimo clenched her fists tightly. Her face was full of anger, as if her path was blocked. Qin Lang's face darkened when he saw Zimo's reaction. In his eyes, Zimo was paying close attention to Yiguchen. Just as the people outside were either feeling sorry for Yiguchen or gloating over his misfortune. Yiguchen finally reached the deepest part of 80,000 feet under the pressure. At this moment, Yiguchen was drenched in sweat. There were many sword wounds on his body. It was obvious that he had paid a great price to reach this place. It's 90,000 feet in front of me. Yiguchen looked up. He could feel that there was an even more terrifying sword chi in front of him. Not only that, there was another kind of pressure spreading. It was the pressure of a false saint expert. The solitary cloud sword saint's place of seclusion should be in front of me. Yiguchen's eyes flickered. If it were an ordinary person, they would rather stop than step in. The solitary cloud sword saint was a character that even the Sword Dao Alliance's leader, proud divine prefecture, didn't care about. Yiguchen's gaze became firm as he made a decision. It was going to take a gamble. After making up his mind, Yiguchen continued to move forward resolutely. What? Are my eyes playing tricks on me? That cloaked man is still moving forward? How stupid must he be to go into the solitary cloud sword saint's forbidden place? Seeing that Yiguchen did not stop, the group of people outside the sword catacomb were stunned. He's really courting death. Inju sneered. Yin Lin and Yin Su were also waiting for Yiguchen to be seriously injured and sent flying. Suki Miyazaki sighed softly. 80,000 feet is already an excellent place to cultivate. If you're greedy, you'll lose everything in the end. Obviously, Suki Miyazaki also thought that Yiguchen was too arrogant. If he was seriously injured and sent flying, he would not be able to last even 80,000 feet and would have to leave the sword catacomb. Zimo was completely worried about Yiguchen. The solitary cloud sword saint's place of seclusion was extremely cold. Frost and snow filled the sky. It's so cold. Yiguchen stepped in and frowned. No, it's not frost and snow. It's... Yiguchen's eyes narrowed. The frost and snow that filled the sky was more like a manifestation of the rules. Yiguchen did not receive the Saint Path Law empowerment. He did not even notice it. It seems that the solitary cloud sword saint is not too far away from the true saint realm, Yiguchen muttered to himself. As he thought, he continued to go deeper. In just a moment, Yiguchen stopped in his tracks. In front of him, the hills seemed to be sealed in ice. The ancient swords that covered the surroundings were also covered in frost and were completely frozen. In this scene of snow falling from the sky and frost on the ground, a black-robed figure sat cross-legged in the ice and snow. His long grayish-white hair was covered in a layer of frost and fell to his shoulders. His face was as sharp as a knife and was extremely cold. Two intersecting scars added a sense of loneliness and coldness. He held a sword in his arms. His entire person seemed to resonate with the world. It was the solitary cloud sword saint, Lung Chen Hen. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.